Every year, thousands of people walk into America's forests and never come back. Not because they chose to disappear, but because something went wrong in places where cell phones don't work and help can be days away. These aren't just statistics. They're real people with families, jobs, and plans for the future. Some involve experienced hikers who knew the wilderness better than their own neighborhoods. Others feature children who vanished in seconds while their parents watched. A few cases led to major changes in how we search for missing people or prepare for outdoor adventures. We won't always find answers, but by examining these cases closely, we might understand something important about the risks that exist in wild places and the people brave enough to explore them anyway. The Vanishing at Spence Field, 1969. In the summer of 1969, when America was still reeling from the cultural upheaval of the decade and Neil Armstrong was preparing to take his first steps on the moon, the Martin family was planning what would become the most devastating camping trip of their lives. But they didn't know that yet. On that warm June morning in Knoxville, Tennessee, it was just another Father's Day weekend tradition about to begin. William Martin was a man who believed in the power of family traditions. Every Father's Day weekend, he would pack up his two sons and head to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park with his father Clyde. It was their special time together, away from the city, away from the responsibilities of daily life. The mountains called to them, promising adventure and the kind of memories that would last a lifetime. Dennis Lloyd Martin was 6 years old that summer, just 6 days away from his 7th birthday. He was a bright, energetic boy with learning disabilities that made school challenging, but out in the wilderness, those difficulties seemed to melt away. Dennis had light brown hair and the kind of infectious smile that made everyone around him feel happy. He was small for his age, weighing only about 40 pounds, but what he lacked in size he made up for in curiosity and determination. His older brother Douglas was along for the trip too, and their grandfather Clyde completed the 3-generation adventure. This was more than just a camping trip for the Martin family. It was a sacred ritual, a way of connecting with each other and with the natural world that surrounded their Tennessee home. On Friday, June 13th, 1969, the 4 Martins loaded up their camping gear and headed toward the Great Smoky Mountains. The plan was simple. Hike from Cades Cove to Russell Field, camp overnight, then continue to Spence Field near the Appalachian Trail for their second night. William had done this route before. He knew the trails, trusted the mountains, and felt confident in his ability to keep his family safe. The first day went perfectly. They hiked through the lush Tennessee forest, breathing in the clean mountain air and enjoying each other's company. Dennis was thrilled to be on another adventure with his dad, brother, and grandfather. He chatted excitedly about the things he saw along the trail, collected interesting rocks, and tried to spot wildlife. That Friday night at Russell Field, they sat around their campfire, roasted marshmallows, and shared stories. Everything was exactly as it should be. Saturday morning, June 14th, brought clear skies and perfect hiking weather. The family broke camp and began their trek towards Spence Field, a popular camping area located near the Appalachian Trail. The hike was about 5 miles, mostly through dense forest and over rolling hills. Dennis kept up well with the group, his small legs working hard to match the pace of the adults. They reached Spence Field in the early afternoon and set up camp in the designated area. The location was beautiful but remote, surrounded by thick forest and steep ravines. Wild animals lived in these woods: black bears, bobcats, wild boars, and venomous copperhead snakes. But the Martin family had camped in bear country before. They knew the precautions, stored their food properly, and weren't particularly worried about wildlife encounters. What they didn't know was that another family had also chosen Spence Field for their Saturday night campout. The Keys from Ohio were there with their children, and soon the two families had struck up a friendship. The kids began playing together while the adults shared stories and camping tips. As the afternoon wore on, the children decided to play a game that kids have been playing for generations: hide and seek. It seemed innocent enough. They were in a clearing, the adults were nearby, and it was broad daylight. Dennis was excited to join in. He loved games, loved being included with the other kids, and was always eager to show that he could keep up despite being the smallest. At approximately 4:30 in the afternoon, Dennis and several other children positioned themselves behind some bushes at the edge of the clearing. Their plan was simple. They would hide, then jump out and surprise the adults who were walking along the nearby trail. It was the kind of harmless prank that children have been pulling on their parents since the beginning of time. William Martin could see the children crouched in the bushes. He smiled to himself, knowing they were planning some kind of surprise. The group of kids was maybe 50 feet away from where the adults were standing. The forest was thick around them, but the children were clearly visible. Then something went wrong. After about 5 minutes, the other children came running back to the campsite, giggling and excited about their successful surprise. But Dennis wasn't with them. William looked around, expecting to see his youngest son emerge from the bushes at any moment. But Dennis didn't appear. William called his name. No answer. He walked over to where he had last seen Dennis hiding behind the bush. The boy wasn't there. He called again, louder this time. Still nothing. What happened next would haunt William Martin for the rest of his life. He began to run down the trail, calling Dennis's name, checking every possible hiding spot. He ran nearly 2 miles, far beyond where a 6-year-old could have travelled in such a short time. Dennis was nowhere to be found. The other campers joined the search. They spread out through the immediate area, calling Dennis's name, checking behind trees, under fallen logs, anywhere a small child might hide or get stuck. The minutes turned into an hour, then 2 hours. Dennis had simply vanished. By early evening, with darkness approaching and storm clouds gathering overhead, the family made the decision that would transform their camping trip into a nightmare. They contacted the National Park Service. Rangers were dispatched immediately, but as the first drops of rain began to fall, everyone knew they were racing against time. That night, as William Martin lay awake in his tent listening to the rain pound against the fabric, he couldn't understand what had happened. His son had been right there, visible, safe, surrounded by family. And then, in the space of less than 5 minutes, Dennis had disappeared as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. The temperature dropped to nearly 50 degrees that night. 3 inches of rain fell in just a few hours, washing out trails and causing streams to flood. Somewhere out in that darkness, in that cold, driving rain, Dennis Martin was alone, if he was still alive. What William Martin didn't know yet was that his son's disappearance would trigger the largest search and rescue operation in the history of the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 1,400 searchers would comb through 56 square miles of some of the most rugged terrain in North America. The National Guard would be called in. Green Berets would join the search. Bloodhounds, helicopters, and every available resource would be deployed. But on that first terrible night, as the rain continued to fall and the temperature continued to drop, William Martin could only lie in his tent and wonder how a simple game of hide-and-seek had gone so catastrophically wrong. His 6-year-old son, who should have been celebrating his 7th birthday in just 6 days, was out there somewhere in the darkness, lost in the Loop Road, 1997. The clock on the dashboard of Amy Wroe Bechtel's white Toyota Tercel reads 2:30 p.m. on July 24th, 1997. She turns onto the Loop Road, 15 miles southwest of Lander, Wyoming, the afternoon sun beating down through her windshield as she drives deeper into the Wind River Range. Amy has a simple plan. Drive the route of the 10-kilometer race she's organising for September, make some mental notes about the course, and be home in plenty of time for dinner with her husband Steve. She doesn't know it yet, but she has less than 2 hours of documented existence left. At 24 years old, Amy Wroe Bechtel is everything you'd expect from an Olympic hopeful. Lean, focused, driven. She holds multiple distance running records at the University of Wyoming and has dreams that stretch all the way to the 2000 Summer Olympics in Sydney. This afternoon, she's wearing her typical workout gear and the Timex Ironman digital watch that rarely leaves her wrist. Her car windows are down, and she's probably thinking about race logistics, training schedules, or maybe just enjoying the mountain air that makes Wyoming feel like the top of the world. The Loop Road is a challenging route that winds through the Wind River Mountains towards South Pass. It's remote, rugged terrain where cell phone service doesn't exist, and help can be hours away. But Amy isn't worried. She's an experienced outdoorswoman who knows these mountains, and she's only planning to scout the race route, not actually run it today. 4:30 p.m. Steve Bechtel returns to their home in Lander after spending the day rock climbing near Dubois with a friend. The house is empty. Amy's not there, but Steve isn't immediately concerned. His wife is independent, athletic, and often runs errands or goes for impromptu training runs. He assumes she'll be home soon, 6 p.m. Still no Amy. Steve starts to feel the first twinge of worry, but he pushes it down. Amy is responsible, capable. She probably lost track of time or decided to grab dinner somewhere. He waits. 8 p.m. The worry is becoming harder to ignore. Amy should have been home by now. She didn't mention any evening plans, and she's usually good about communication. Steve starts calling friends, asking if anyone has seen her or knows where she might be. 10 p.m. The worry has transformed into genuine fear. Steve calls Amy's parents, hoping against hope that she might be there, that there's some simple explanation he's missing. "Do you know where Amy is?" he asks. The answer is no. Nobody has seen her since she left that afternoon. Steve hangs up the phone and makes the call that will change everything. He contacts the Fremont County Sheriff's Department to report Amy missing. Within minutes, a search begins. Friends and volunteers spread out across Lander, checking Amy's usual haunts, driving the streets, looking for any sign of her or her white Toyota Tercel. 12:30 a.m., July 25th. The search has been going for 2.5 hours with no results. Amy has now been missing for approximately 10 hours. The volunteers are tired, but nobody wants to stop looking. They expand their search beyond the town limits, thinking maybe Amy had car trouble somewhere on the mountain roads. 1 a.m. A searcher's flashlight beam cuts through the darkness and illuminates something that makes his blood run cold. Amy's white Toyota Tercel sits at Burnt Gulch, an area along the loop road she had planned to scout. The car is unlocked, the keys are nowhere to be found. There's no sign of struggle, no indication of what happened to Amy. She has simply vanished. 3 a.m. Law enforcement officers arrive at the scene. The car is processed for evidence, but it reveals frustratingly little. Amy's purse isn't there. Her running shoes aren't there. The car appears to have been parked normally, not abandoned in haste or panic. But Amy is gone, and the wilderness around Burnt Gulch stretches for miles in every direction. Dawn, July 25th. As the sun rises over the Wind River Range, the full scope of the search area becomes clear. This isn't like looking for someone in a city or even in a state park. This is some of the most remote, rugged terrain in North America. There are countless ravines, dense forests, rocky outcroppings, and treacherous creek beds where someone could disappear forever. The search effort explodes in size. Within hours, dozens of volunteers are combing the area around Burnt Gulch. Search and rescue teams, bloodhounds, and helicopters join the effort. Everyone is working under the assumption that Amy is still alive, that she needs immediate help, that every minute counts. 8 a.m. The first helicopter takes off, beginning aerial searches of the massive wilderness area. From the air, the terrain looks even more daunting. The forest is so dense that a person could be lying 10 feet from a search trail and remain invisible from above. July 26th, 48 hours missing. The search has expanded to include multiple agencies and hundreds of volunteers. Mines are being checked. Lakes are being searched. Every possible theory is being investigated. Did Amy fall and injure herself? Was she attacked by a mountain lion or bear? Did she encounter someone with malicious intent? The possibilities are endless and terrifying. July 27th, 72 hours missing. The Fremont County Sheriff's Department is receiving over 1,000 phone calls per day with tips, potential sightings, and theories about Amy's disappearance. Each call must be investigated, each lead followed up. The vast majority lead nowhere, but search teams can't afford to ignore any of them. 1 week missing. The search has become one of the largest missing person operations in Wyoming history. National media attention is focused on the case. Amy's photo is everywhere. Her family pleads for information, for any clue that might lead to finding her. But the wilderness keeps its secrets. 2 weeks missing, the massive search efforts begin to scale back, though they never completely stop. The initial hope of finding Amy alive is fading, replaced by the grim reality that this might be a recovery operation rather than a rescue. But her body isn't found either. Amy Wroe Bechtel has simply vanished as completely as if she never existed. August 1st. Steve Bechtel, Amy's husband, is questioned by police. Detectives have found journals in his possession containing disturbing writings about violence towards women. They confront him with what they claim is evidence that he murdered his wife. Steve terminates the interview and retains a lawyer. The investigation takes a dark turn toward the people closest to Amy, Late August 1997. The FBI requests satellite images from NASA of the area where Amy disappeared, hoping technology might reveal what human searchers have missed. The images show nothing. Every lead seems to evaporate. Every promising clue turns into another dead end. January 1998. Even satellite images from the Russian space station Mir are obtained and analysed. They reveal nothing new. Amy Wroe Bechtel remains as missing as the day she vanished. June 2003. 6 years after Amy's disappearance, a doctor hiking near the Popoa G River finds a Timex Ironman digital watch, similar to the one Amy was wearing. Law enforcement cannot determine if it belonged to her. Another potential clue that leads nowhere. The clock that started ticking at 2:30 p.m. on July 24, 1997 is still running. Amy Wroe Bechtel has been missing for over 27 years now. Her white Toyota Tercel was found within hours, but Amy herself vanished into the Wyoming wilderness as completely as if she had been erased from existence. The student's last hike, 1976. The call came into the Great Smoky Mountains National Park dispatch at 4:30 p.m. on October 8, 1976. Ranger Sammy Lyle received the report with a sinking feeling in his stomach. A 16-year-old girl named Trenny Gibson had vanished from the high school field trip. She'd been missing for over an hour, and darkness was falling fast over the mountains. When Lyle arrived at the Klingman's Dome parking area, he found a scene of barely controlled panic. Wayne Dunlap, the supervising teacher from Bearden High School in Knoxville, was pacing near the bus. 38 students were accounted for, one was not. Trenny Lynn Gibson had simply disappeared into thin air. The initial facts seemed straightforward enough. The horticulture students had hiked from the parking area to Andrews Bald, about 1.5 miles through dense forest. They were supposed to observe the native plants and trees, then return to the bus by 3:30 p.m. Most students had made it back on time. Trenny had not. But as Ranger Lyle began interviewing the students, the straightforward story became something much more mysterious. The last group to see Trenny alive consisted of 5 students: Angela Beckner, Lisa Mickles, Bobby Coghill, Scott Troy, and Anita Rounds. They all told the same story. Trenny had caught up with them on the trail back from Andrews Bald. She was walking faster than their group, so Bobby had started walking with her to keep pace. After about 5 minutes of walking together, the group had decided to sit down and rest. They were roughly 1/2 mile to 3/4 mile from the parking area where the bus waited. Trenny said she wanted to keep going. She was eager to get back. Here's where the story takes its first strange turn. The students watched Trenny continue down the trail ahead of them. They saw her stop, bend down as if to pick something up or tie her shoe, then turn right off the established trail. There was no side trail at that location. The terrain was rocky, overgrown with thick underbrush and briars, with a small stream making the ground slick and treacherous. David Eastham came up the trail from behind the resting group moments later. When the students looked back down the trail to see where Trenny had gone, she was nowhere to be seen. She had vanished completely. The students assumed Trenny would somehow make her way back to the trail and beat them to the bus. They continued their hike. When they reached the parking area at 3:40 p.m, Trenny wasn't there. Dunlap and another student immediately hiked back toward Andrews Bald and to a nearby shelter at Double Springs, searching for any sign of the missing girl. They found nothing. That's when the National Park Service was contacted, launching what would become one of the most extensive searches in the park's history. The first night's search was hampered by terrible weather. Wind, rain, and thick fog made visibility nearly impossible. 19 searchers combed the area between 6:30 and 8 p.m. before conditions forced them to stop. Trenny's mother, Hope Gibson, wasn't even notified her daughter was missing until 8 p.m, 5 hours after the disappearance. The real search began the next morning, October 9th, 1976. This is where the first pieces of physical evidence emerged, and they painted a disturbing picture. Near the spot where Trenny was last seen, searchers found several broken ferns. More significantly, they discovered 3 cigarette butts and a partially opened can of beer. The following day, 8 more cigarette butts of the same brand were found in the same general area. None of the students on the field trip were known to smoke. Trenny certainly didn't smoke or drink. So who had been in that exact location consuming cigarettes and beer right around the time a 16-year-old girl vanished. The tracking dogs provided the next clue, and it was perhaps the most disturbing one of all. Multiple bloodhounds and German shepherds traced Trenny's scent to a spot on the paved road about 1.6 miles from the Klingman's Dome parking area. The dogs were certain Trenny had been at that road, but there was a problem. That location was nowhere near where she had been hiking. To reach that road, Trenny would have had to travel through dense, difficult terrain in a completely different direction from where she was headed. And she would have had to do it without any of the dozens of searchers finding a single trace of her passage. Or someone had carried her there. The search expanded to include over 750 people over the next 2 weeks. National Guard helicopters joined the effort. Every major and minor trail between Andrews Bald and Elkmont, Tennessee was searched. Teams combed an area covering 15 miles in one direction and 14 miles in another. They found nothing. In the spring of 1977, Trenny's father organised a second search that lasted nearly 3 weeks and involved 230 additional searchers. Again, nothing. But there were other pieces to this puzzle that investigators discovered as they dug deeper into the case. At a shelter called Double Springs, searchers found footprints of a smaller-sized Adidas tennis shoe in the sandy soil. The footprints were remarkably well preserved, considering that 3 inches of rain had fallen the night Trenny disappeared. This meant the footprints were either made after the rain stopped, or they were protected from the weather somehow. Several students mentioned seeing a man near the trail that day. He wasn't part of their group, wasn't a park ranger, and wasn't with any other hiking party they recognized. Just a lone man in the forest, in the exact area where a teenage girl would disappear hours later. The dogs tracking Trenny's scent led investigators to some troubling conclusions. The scent trail didn't follow any logical path a lost or injured person would take. It seemed to indicate that Trenny had been moved, possibly against her will, to different locations throughout the park. One particularly disturbing detail emerged from the student interviews. Robert Simpson, who had shared a bus seat with Trenny and hiked with her to Andrews Bald, had been wearing a coat that belonged to her. Students later reported that after Trenny's disappearance, a comb that belonged to her was found in the pocket of that coat, which was now back in Robert's possession. How did Trenny's personal comb end up in the pocket of a coat she had loaned to a classmate, after she'd already reclaimed the coat and was wearing it when she vanished? The cigarette evidence pointed to an adult presence in the area. The dogs indicated Trenny had been moved to the road. The mysterious man seen by students suggested someone had been watching the group. The footprints at the shelter implied someone had been there recently, possibly hiding or waiting. Investigators developed several theories. The first was that Trenny had run away, possibly with someone she had arranged to meet in the park. But this theory had problems. Trenny had no history of rebellious behaviour, no boyfriend her parents didn't know about, and no reason to disappear. Plus, she didn't even know where the field trip was going until she got on the bus that morning. The second theory was that Trenny had suffered an accident, fallen into a ravine or stream, and her body had been washed away or covered by debris. Extensive searches of all water sources and ravines in the area found no evidence to support this theory. The third theory, the one that kept investigators awake at night, was that Trenny had been abducted. The evidence seemed to support this possibility. The mysterious man, the cigarette butts and beer can, the scent trail leading to the road, the impossibility of finding any trace of her despite massive search efforts. If Trenny had been taken by someone who knew the park well, someone who could move through the forest without leaving obvious tracks, someone who had been watching and waiting for the right opportunity, it would explain everything. The thick fog that rolled in that evening would have provided perfect cover for removing her from the park entirely. But 47 years later, there are still no answers. Trenny Gibson remains one of the most perplexing disappearances in National Park Service history. The evidence suggests abduction, but there's no definitive proof. The clues point to multiple possibilities, but none can be confirmed beyond doubt. What investigators do know is this. A 16-year-old girl stepped off a trail in the Great Smoky Mountains on October 8, 1976, and was never seen again. Someone was smoking cigarettes and drinking beer in that exact location around the time she vanished. Dogs tracked her scent to a road where a vehicle could have been waiting, and despite the most extensive search effort in the park's history, no trace of Trenny Gibson has ever been found. 3 years old and gone, 1999. Every September 8th since 2008, the state of Colorado officially recognizes Recreational Safety Awareness Week. It's a time when park rangers give extra safety talks, when parents hold their children a little tighter on hiking trails, and when search and rescue teams across the state remember why their training matters so much. Most people don't know that this week exists because of a 3-year-old boy named Jared Atadero, who disappeared on October 2nd, 1999. The ripples from that one terrible day continue to spread outward, touching families, communities, and policies more than 2 decades later. Today, when a child goes missing in Colorado, the response is faster, more coordinated, and more comprehensive than it was in 1999. The changes didn't happen overnight, and they came at a cost that no family should ever have to pay. In schools across Colorado, teachers now receive mandatory training about group supervision and child safety protocols during field trips. The Christian Singles Network, the organization that lost Jared that day, no longer exists. Search and rescue teams have upgraded their equipment, improved their communication systems, and developed new protocols specifically for searching for missing children in wilderness areas. But the most significant change might be something you can't see, the way missing children cases are handled in the critical first hours. Before Jared Atadero, there was often a waiting period, a belief that children would turn up on their own, that panic was premature. After Jared Atadero, every missing child case became an immediate emergency. The congressional record from December 4th, 2000 contains a brief but significant entry. House Resolution 3909, an act to designate the Big South Trail in the Comanche Peak Wilderness area in the state of Colorado to the legacy of Jared Atadero. It's just one line in thousands of pages of legislation, but it represents something profound. A 3-year-old boy's name is now permanently attached to the place where he vanished, ensuring that his story becomes part of the landscape itself. October 2nd, 1999 started as a perfect autumn day in the Colorado Rockies. Alan Atadero was a single father raising 2 children, 3-year-old Jared and 6-year-old Josalyn. He had recently joined the Christian Singles Network, a religious group that provided community and support for divorced parents. The group had become like family to the Ataderos, helping with childcare and providing friendship during a difficult time in Alan's life. That morning, the Christian Singles Network had planned a simple trip to a local fish hatchery with the children. It was supposed to be educational, safe, and close to home. Alan was initially reluctant to let his children go without him, but the group leaders assured him they would only be visiting the hatchery. He trusted them. He had no reason not to. What Alan didn't know was that the beautiful weather would tempt the group to change their plans. Instead of just visiting the hatchery, they decided to take an impromptu hike up the Big South Trail in the Arapahoe and Roosevelt National Forest. It was 15 miles from the resort where Alan was staying, deep in wilderness that required experience and preparation to navigate safely. The group consisted of 11 adults and 2 children, Jared and his sister Josalyn. They split into faster and slower hiking groups as they made their way up the trail. Jared, energetic and curious as most 3-year-olds are, ran ahead of the slower group he was with. 2 fishermen later told investigators they saw him walking rapidly up the trail near some campsites, alone but seemingly confident. Then came the scream. Josalyn later described it as ambiguous, something that could have been playful or terrifying. The group searched for about an hour before returning to tell Alan that his son was missing. When they delivered the news, Alan collapsed emotionally. He got into his vehicle, beating his chest and screaming, "They lost my baby! They lost my baby!" The search that followed became one of the largest missing child operations in Colorado history, but it was also chaotic, hindered by media frenzy and ultimately unsuccessful. After 3 days, the massive effort was scaled back. Jared Atadero had simply vanished. The story might have ended there, another unsolved disappearance in the wilderness. But on May 6, 2003, 2 businessmen hiking in the same area found Jared's remains. DNA testing confirmed what everyone feared. The 3-year-old boy was dead. The discovery of Jared's body should have brought closure, but it only deepened the mystery. His clothes were found in nearly perfect condition, his Disney Tarzan sneakers showing minimal wear despite supposedly having been in the wilderness for over 3 years. His pants were turned inside out, something no wild animal would do. The evidence didn't match any known pattern of predator attack or accidental death. But Jared's father, Alan Atadero, decided to transform his personal tragedy into something that could help other families. He began speaking at conferences, meeting with legislators, and advocating for changes in how missing children cases are handled. His message was simple. The system that existed in 1999 wasn't good enough. Too many children were falling through the cracks. The first major change came in search and rescue protocols. Before Jared's case, there was often a 24-hour waiting period before a full-scale search began, based on the assumption that missing children would likely return on their own. Jared's disappearance helped establish new policies requiring immediate response to missing child reports, especially in wilderness areas. Training programs for volunteer search and rescue teams were expanded and standardized across Colorado. The helicopter crash that occurred during Jared's search, which severely injured multiple rescuers, led to improved safety protocols and better equipment for aerial searches. New communication systems were implemented to prevent the coordination problems that had plagued Jared's search. Governor Bill Ritter's declaration of Recreational Safety Awareness Week wasn't just symbolic. It came with funding for educational programs, improved signage in state parks, and mandatory safety briefings for organized groups planning wilderness activities. The week serves as an annual reminder that the wilderness is beautiful but dangerous, especially for children. The impact extended beyond Colorado. Jared's case became part of the growing database of missing persons cases that led to improved Amber Alert systems nationwide. Child protection advocates used Jared's story to push for faster response times and better coordination between law enforcement agencies when children disappear. In schools, new policies were implemented requiring stricter adult-to-child ratios for field trips, especially those involving wilderness areas. The Christian Singles Network's decision to change their itinerary without informing parents became a cautionary tale taught in educator training programs across the country. Perhaps most significantly, Jared's case contributed to a fundamental shift in how missing children cases are perceived and handled. The old assumption that children would eventually turn up safe was replaced by an understanding that every hour matters, that immediate action can mean the difference between life and death. Today, when Alan Atadero visits the Big South Trail, he sees the dedication plaque that bears his son's name. But he also sees improved trail markers, better emergency communication systems, and safety improvements that didn't exist in 1999. He knows these changes came too late to save Jared, but he hopes they might save other children. The ripples continue to spread. Every time a missing child is found because searchers responded immediately instead of waiting, Jared's legacy grows. Every time a parent receives better information about wilderness safety, every time a search and rescue team uses improved protocols, every time a school group makes different decisions because they understand the risks better, Jared Atadero's short life continues to matter. The Horseback Rider's Mystery, 1981. Some families find their connection through shared meals around the dinner table. Others bond over weekend sports or movie nights. For the Aris family of Saratoga, California, their special moments happened on hiking trails and mountain paths. George and Carol Aris believed in the healing power of the outdoors, and they had passed that love on to their children, Sandra, Stephanie, their son George, and 14-year-old Stacy. Stacy Ann Aris was the kind of teenager who felt more comfortable in hiking boots than high heels. She had straight brown hair, metal braces on her teeth, and the kind of easy confidence that comes from growing up in a family that spends their weekends exploring the wilderness. While other kids her age were at shopping malls or movie theaters, Stacy was happiest when she was outdoors with a camera in her hands, capturing the beauty of the natural world. The summer of 1981 had been particularly difficult for Stacy. She was dealing with typical teenage problems: school stress, family tensions, and the complicated emotions that come with being 14 years old. Some reports suggested she was missing a boyfriend, though her mother Carol would later deny that Stacy had any serious romantic relationships. Whatever was troubling her, George Aris knew that his daughter needed something to help her through this rough patch. A 4-day horseback riding trip to Yosemite National Park seemed like the perfect solution. George had arranged to join a group trip organised by Chris Grimes, an experienced guide who knew the park's High Sierra Camp Loop trail system. It would be a chance for father and daughter to reconnect, away from the pressures of home and school, surrounded by some of the most beautiful wilderness in America. On July 17, 1981, George and Stacy drove the familiar route from Saratoga to Yosemite, a journey they had made many times before for family camping trips. Stacy brought her Olympus camera, excited about the photographic opportunities the trip would offer. She was already an accomplished photographer for her age, with an eye for capturing the dramatic landscapes and intimate natural details that make the Sierra Nevada mountains so spectacular. They met the rest of their group at Tuolumne Meadows, the staging area for their adventure. The group size varied depending on which account you read. Some sources said 7 people, others mentioned as many as 20. What mattered was that everyone seemed friendly and experienced, and Stacy was looking forward to 4 days of horseback riding through some of the most pristine wilderness in California. The first part of their journey took them along the John Muir Trail toward Upper Cathedral Lakes. Stacy was an experienced rider, comfortable in the saddle, and she enjoyed the steady rhythm of the horse's gait as they climbed higher into the mountains. At around 3 p.m. on July 17th, the group stopped for lunch near the cathedral-like granite formations that gave the area its name. After lunch, they continued riding for several more hours, climbing steadily toward their destination, Sunrise High Sierra Camp. Located at 9,400 feet above sea level, about 3 miles southeast of Tenaya Lake, the camp consisted of 9 rustic cabins that could house 34 guests. It was the last stop on the 50-mile High Sierra Camp loop, set against an alpine meadow with spectacular views of Mount Florence and Mount Clark. By the time they reached Sunrise Camp in the late afternoon, everyone was tired and dusty from the long day in the saddle. Stacy was eager to clean up and stretch her legs. The camp had basic facilities, enough for guests to wash off the trail dust and change into fresh clothes. The group would spend the night here before continuing their journey the next day. After freshening up, Stacy emerged from the cabins wearing an off-white pullover windbreaker over a white jersey blouse, leggings, and sturdy grey hiking boots. She had her Olympus camera with her and mentioned to her father that she wanted to take a short walk towards Sunrise Lakes to photograph the area. The lakes were about 1.5 miles away, and the afternoon light would be perfect for the kind of landscape photography Stacy loved. George Arras was tired from the day's ride and declined to accompany his daughter. "Have a good time," he told her, probably looking forward to relaxing at the camp while Stacy pursued her photography. It was a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Stacy noticed an elderly member of their group, Gerald Stewart, sitting on a boulder about 100 feet from the cabins. Stewart was between 70 and 77 years old, and interestingly, he was also from Saratoga. Whether they knew each other before this trip or had just met is unclear, but Stacy thought it might be nice to have company for her photography walk. She approached Stewart and asked if he'd like to join her. He agreed, and the two set off down the trail toward either the flooded Long Meadow, which was just a few hundred yards away, or the more distant Sunrise Lakes. Chris Grimes, the guide, was tending to the horses in a corral and happened to see Stacy taking photographs as she walked down the trail with Stewart. About 20 minutes into their walk, Stewart began to feel tired. At his age, and at an altitude of over 9,000 feet, this wasn't surprising after a full day of horseback riding. He told Stacy he needed to sit down and rest. She seemed understanding, but was eager to continue toward the lakes to capture the late afternoon light. They agreed that she would go ahead while he rested, and they would meet back at camp later. Stewart watched 14-year-old Stacy Arras continue down the trail alone, her camera in hand, excited about the photograph she was going to take. It was approximately 4 p.m. on July 17, 1981. Stacy walked down the trail, stopped briefly to take a picture, and then continued until the trees obscured her from view. She was never seen again. When Stacy didn't return by early evening, Stewart became concerned. He walked further down the trail in the direction she had gone, calling her name and expecting to find her taking photographs, or perhaps having lost track of time. But there was no sign of her. He returned to camp and alerted the rest of the group. The other members of the riding party spread out and began searching the immediate area, calling Stacy's name and checking obvious places where she might have gone off trail to get a better camera angle. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, their casual search became desperate. At that elevation, nighttime temperatures could be dangerous for someone unprepared for an overnight stay in the wilderness. By morning, when Stacy still hadn't returned, the group contacted the National Park Service. What followed was one of the largest search and rescue operations in Yosemite's history. Over the next 10 days, between 100 and 150 searchers, including 67 volunteers from the Mountain Rescue Association, combed a 3 to 5 square mile area around Sunrise Lakes. 3 helicopters flew over 40 hours of search missions. The cost exceeded $100,000, and searchers logged over 8,000 man-hours. The only trace of Stacey Arras ever found was the lens cap from her Olympus camera, discovered just inside the tree line near where she was last seen. No footprints, no clothing, no other camera equipment, no sign that she'd ever been in the area the searchers covered so thoroughly. George Arras spent those 10 days living in a nightmare. His daughter had simply vanished in a place he thought was safe, during an activity they had shared many times before. The mountains that had always brought his family peace and healing had taken his child and given nothing back. No answers, no closure, no trace of what had happened to her. Carol Arras, Stacey's mother, later expressed her bewilderment to reporters. It's strange that even a small item like a gum wrapper or her windbreaker didn't turn up after all the efforts, she said. How does a 14-year-old girl disappear so completely that even the most extensive search in park history finds nothing but a lens cap? The case remains open more than 40 years later. The National Park Service has compiled nearly 2,000 pages of case files that they refuse to release, citing an ongoing criminal investigation. Theories range from accidental death to abduction to something even more mysterious. But George Arras, now in his 80s, still has no answers about what happened to his daughter on that July afternoon in 1981. Midnight phone call, 2008. 12:30 a.m. May 14th, 2008. The phone rings in the Swanson household in Marshall, Minnesota. Brian Swanson reaches over to answer, probably expecting a routine call from his 19-year-old son Brandon, who'd been celebrating the end of spring semester with friends in Canby. What he hears instead is the beginning of one of the most perplexing disappearances in Minnesota history. "Dad, I'm in the ditch," Brandon's voice comes through clearly. "I need you guys to come get me." Brandon explains that he's driven his 1998 Chevrolet Lumina off the road somewhere near Lind, about 7 miles southwest of Marshall. The car isn't damaged, but it's stuck and he can't get it out. He's not hurt, just frustrated and needing help. Brian and his wife Annette throw on clothes and head out into the night to rescue their son. 12:35 a.m. The Swansons are driving toward Lind, keeping Brandon on the phone to help coordinate their rescue efforts. Brandon is walking around his car trying to figure out exactly where he is. He can see lights in the distance that he believes belong to the town of Lind. The phone connection isn't perfect. They're dealing with rural cell towers and spotty coverage, but they can communicate. 12:45 a.m. Brian and Annette reach Lind and drive slowly through the small town, looking for Brandon's car or any sign of him. They flash their headlights, hoping he'll see them and flash back. Brandon says he's flashing his lights too, but neither party can see the other. This is the first indication that something might be seriously wrong. 1 a.m. Growing frustrated with their inability to locate each other, Brandon tells his parents he's going to leave the car and walk toward the lights he can see. He believes those lights are Lind and it should be a short walk. He tells his father to go to the parking lot of a local bar in Lind and wait for him there. Brian drives to the specified location while staying on the phone with his son. 1:15 a.m. Brandon is walking along what he describes as a gravel road. He's talking to his father about what he sees: farmland, fences, the sound of running water nearby. He seems confident about his direction and tells his parents not to worry. The walk is taking longer than expected, but Brandon remains calm and continues moving toward what he believes is Lind. 1:30 a.m. Brandon has been walking for about 30 minutes now. He tells his father that he can see the lights more clearly and believes he's getting close to town. The conversation continues normally, a son talking to his worried parents, trying to reassure them that everything will be fine once he reaches the meeting point. 1:45 a.m. Brian is parked at the bar in Lind, scanning the streets for any sign of his son. Brandon is still walking, still talking, still describing the rural landscape around him. The phone connection wavers occasionally but remains functional. There's nothing in Brandon's voice to suggest panic or immediate danger. 2 a.m. Brandon has been walking for about an hour now. He mentions passing some fence lines and continues to hear running water, which he assumes is a creek or small river. His pace sounds steady, his breathing normal. He's a healthy 19-year-old college student, and a walk in the countryside shouldn't be particularly challenging for him. 2:15 a.m. The conversation between father and son continues. Brandon describes his surroundings: farmland, gravel roads, the ongoing sound of water. Brian tries to give him guidance based on his knowledge of the area around Lind. Neither of them realizes that Brandon is actually walking in a completely different location, 25 miles away from where they think he is. 2:30 a.m. Brandon suddenly interrupts himself mid-sentence. "Oh shit," he exclaims. The words are clear and sharp, suggesting surprise or alarm rather than pain. Then the phone line goes silent. 2 hours, 30 minutes and 15 seconds a.m. Brian calls out to his son, "Brandon! Brandon!" No response. The phone line is still connected, but there's only silence on the other end. 2:31 a.m. Brian hangs up and immediately calls Brandon back. The call goes straight to voicemail. He tries again. Same result. Annette tries calling from her phone. Voicemail. Something has gone very wrong very quickly. 2:45 a.m. The Swansons continue trying to reach Brandon, calling his phone repeatedly. Every call goes to voicemail. They drive around Lind again, looking frantically for any sign of their son. They check the bar parking lot, the streets, anywhere Brandon might have been walking, nothing. 3 a.m. Brian and Annette expand their search beyond Lind, driving the rural roads between Lind and Canby, thinking maybe Brandon was confused about his location. They stop frequently to call his name into the darkness. The only response is silence and the sound of wind across empty farmland. 4 a.m. As dawn begins to approach, the Swansons realize they need help. They've been searching for over an hour and haven't found any trace of Brandon or his car. The phone calls to his cell phone continue to go straight to voicemail. They drive home to regroup and decide what to do next. 6:30 a.m. Brian and Annette contact the Lind Police Department to report Brandon missing. The officer who takes their call is not particularly concerned. Young men Brandon's age often stay out all night after celebrating, especially at the end of a school term. The officer tells them it's Brandon's right to be missing and suggests they wait to see if he turns up on his own. 8 a.m. Against the advice of the Lind police, the Swansons begin their own organised search. They contact friends and family members to help look for Brandon. The search focuses on the area around Lind, since that's where Brandon said he was headed. They find nothing. 10 a.m. The Lind Police Department finally begins taking the case seriously and starts their own search. They too focus on the Lind area, checking roads, fields, and any place a young man might have ended up after a night of walking in the dark. 12 p.m, 12 hours after Brandon's "oh shit" exclamation, there's still no sign of him. The Lind police contact the Lyon County Sheriff's Office for assistance. Sheriff Joel Dahl agrees to help with the search efforts. 2 p.m. A crucial discovery changes everything. Sheriff Dahl obtains Brandon's cell phone records to better focus the search efforts. The records show that Brandon's phone had been connecting to a cell tower near Taunton, not Lind. Taunton is 25 miles away from Lind, in a completely different direction from Marshall. 3:30 p.m. Acting on the cell phone data, searchers shift their focus to the area around Taunton. They're looking for Brandon's car now, realizing that he had been completely wrong about his location during the phone calls with his parents. 4:15 p.m. Brandon's 1998 Chevrolet Lumina is found in a ditch along a gravel road in Lincoln County, about a mile north of Highway 68. The car is nose down in the ditch but not severely damaged. It's empty. There's no sign of Brandon anywhere nearby. 4:45 p.m. Investigators examine Brandon's abandoned car. The keys are missing. There are no obvious signs of struggle or foul play. The car appears to have simply slid off the gravel road into the ditch, exactly as Brandon had described to his parents. But Brandon is nowhere to be found. 5 p.m. The search area is recalibrated based on the car's location. If Brandon had walked away from this spot, he could have gone in any direction across miles of rural farmland. The task of finding him just became exponentially more difficult. 6 p.m. Search dogs are brought in to try to pick up Brandon's scent from his abandoned car. The dogs immediately pick up a trail leading away from the vehicle. They follow the scent for about 3 miles, generally heading northwest toward an abandoned farm. 7:30 p.m. The search dogs lose Brandon's scent trail at the Yellow Medicine River. The dogs seem to indicate that the scent goes into the water. Searchers begin to consider the possibility that Brandon may have accidentally fallen into the river and drowned. May 15th, 6 a.m. 24 hours after the first phone call, ground searches continue along the Yellow Medicine River. Boats are brought in to search the water. The current is strong, and if Brandon had fallen in, his body could have been carried downstream for miles. May 16th, 8 a.m. 48 hours missing. The search has expanded to include multiple counties and involves dozens of volunteers. Helicopters join the effort, scanning vast areas of farmland from above. Despite the massive effort, no trace of Brandon is found beyond the scent trail that ended at the river. 1 week later, the large-scale search efforts begin to wind down. Sheriff Jack Vizecki commits to walking the banks of the Yellow Medicine River every day for 30 days, but finds nothing. Brandon's parents leave their porch light on every night, hoping their son will somehow find his way home. 17 years later, Brandon Swanson's cell phone has never been found. His body has never been recovered. The "oh shit" he exclaimed at 2:30 a.m. on May 14, 2008, remains the last words anyone ever heard from him. The bicycle on Solduke Road, 2017. Some mysteries begin not with what's there, but with what's missing. On the afternoon of April 6, 2017, Ranger John Bowie was driving along Solduke Hot Springs Road in Olympic National Park when something caught his eye. There, about 6 miles up the winding forest road, sat an abandoned bicycle with a bright yellow and red trailer attached. The setup was impossible to miss, positioned just 10 yards from the road, 20 feet from the Solduke River. What struck Bowie as odd wasn't just the location. Touring cyclists were common in the area, especially in spring. But this bike had been sitting in the same spot since yesterday, and now it was obvious someone was missing. The red Specialized hard rock mountain bike was heavy and functional, clearly built for long-distance travel rather than speed. Behind the seat, someone had fashioned a homemade plywood rack with 2 milk crates bolted side by side. The attached burly trailer was packed with camping gear: pots, pans, wool blankets, a roll of duct tape, a toolbox, camping stove, a deck of cards, a Bible, a tent, fuel bottles, Mountain House dehydrated meals, 2 first aid kits, climbing gear, and enough tarps and rope for serious outdoor living. But it was what Bowie found scattered around the bike that made this discovery truly puzzling. A polytarp was spread out on the ground, surrounded by organised camping equipment, as if someone had been sorting through their gear. Most strange of all, 4 arrows were stuck in the ground in a perfect east-west line near the tarp. A bow lay nearby on the ground. This wasn't the scene of an accident or a robbery. Nothing appeared damaged. The bike's tyres weren't flat, there was no evidence of a vehicle collision, and most of the valuable gear remained untouched. Someone had deliberately stopped here, laid out their equipment, and then vanished. Bowie called his fellow ranger Brian Ray and asked him to check the area again the next morning. When Ray arrived on April 7th, the bike and trailer sat exactly where they'd been found, now untouched for 2 full days. Among the scattered belongings, Ray discovered a list of phone numbers. The bike belonged to Jacob Gray, a 22-year-old from Santa Cruz, California. The first phone call went to Jacob's sister Mallory, who immediately urged rangers to contact their parents. What they learned painted a picture of a young man seeking direction in life through adventure. Jacob had been living with his grandmother in Port Townsend, Washington, preparing for an ambitious cross-country bicycle tour to Vermont to visit his brother Micah, who was stationed there with the Coast Guard. The plan was simple. Jacob would spend up to 2 years cycling across America, picking up odd jobs and seasonal farm work along the way. He'd told his family he was heading east, toward his brother. So why had he ridden west, deeper into Olympic National Park's wilderness? Rangers began working through the most logical explanation. The Solduke River ran swift and cold just 20 feet from where the bike was found. In April, the water temperature hovered around 40 degrees, cold enough to kill an unprepared person within minutes. Maybe Jacob had walked to the river to filter water into his missing Camelback hydration pack. If he'd slipped on the mossy rocks and fallen in, the current could have swept him downstream before he could climb out. But this theory raised its own questions. Jacob was described by his family as an excellent swimmer, an experienced surfer who wasn't fazed by cold water. He often surfed in Northern California without a wetsuit, even in winter. Would someone with his water experience really fall victim to a routine trip to refill his water supply? On April 12th, nearly a week after the bike's discovery, volunteer trackers from Olympic Mountain Rescue finally arrived to examine the scene. They claimed to find evidence that someone had changed from hiking boots to running shoes, walked to the river's edge, slipped and fallen in, leaving a mark on a mossy rock. 30 yards downstream, they found signs that someone might have scrambled back out of the water. But tracking isn't an exact science, and these conclusions were largely guesswork. The marks could have been made by any number of animals. Otters, beavers, even mountain lions frequently use the riverbank. Chief Ranger Jay Shields later estimated the probability that these tracks belonged to Jacob at less than 5%. 2 cadaver dogs were brought in and both alerted on a logjam in the river, suggesting the presence of human remains. Teams searched every logjam for 12 miles in both directions, diving into pools and checking caves behind waterfalls. Jacob's father Randy even tied himself to a rope and dove into the dangerous pool behind Salmon Falls. Nothing was found. Meanwhile, investigators were developing a more detailed picture of Jacob's mental state. His parents had divorced 4 years earlier, and Jacob had struggled with the transition to adulthood. His sister Mallory described him as really lost and seeking answers in the Bible. The Holman Bible found with his gear had Isaiah 34, 14 circled, a cryptic passage about desert creatures and night monsters. Jacob's family began exploring darker possibilities. Could he have been abducted? As a handsome young man who'd done some modelling work, including a Disney audition, might someone have targeted him? His father Randy walked the streets of Port Angeles at 2 a.m, talking to anyone who might have seen something. There were reported sightings, but none proved credible. The arrow arrangement continued to puzzle investigators. Why would someone stick 4 arrows in the ground in a deliberate east-west line? Was it a signal for someone who might come looking? A marker pointing toward his intended destination? Or something more personal? Perhaps related to his interest in archery or his spiritual seeking? Mallory noticed that several items were missing from Jacob's gear that would be essential for a long hike. Throwing knives she'd given him, climbing crampons, a warm jacket and a backpack. A water filter and his camelback were also gone. If Jacob had been forced to abandon his bike, these were exactly the items he would have grabbed for survival. The search officially became passive after 2 weeks, meaning no additional resources would be allocated unless new evidence emerged. For Jacob's family, this felt like abandonment. They continued searching on their own, with Randy essentially moving to the Olympic Peninsula to conduct daily searches throughout the summer and fall of 2017. The breakthrough came over a year later, on August 10th, 2018. A team of biologists studying marmots in the high country made a grim discovery near Wroe Lake, 5,300 feet above sea level and at least 15 miles from where Jacob had left his bike. They found human remains, clothing, gear and a wallet. The location defied explanation. Wroe Lake sits in alpine terrain that would have been snow-covered and avalanche-prone in April 2017. How had Jacob travelled 15 miles through wilderness to reach a spot 5,300 feet higher than where his bike was found? The area wasn't near any established trail, and the remains were discovered on a treeless ridge that should have been visible from search aircraft. When the remains were identified as Jacob's through dental records, more questions arose than were answered. He'd been found with warm clothing, a lighter and food supplies. There were no signs of trauma. The official cause of death was listed as inconclusive, though hypothermia was considered likely. But how does someone properly equipped with warm clothes and survival gear die of hypothermia? Why would an experienced outdoorsman travel into dangerous alpine terrain during avalanche season? Most puzzling of all, why arrange his arrows in that deliberate pattern before abandoning a bike he'd spent months preparing for a cross-country journey? Dr. Robert Koester, author of the search and rescue manual Lost Person Behavior, offered one possible explanation. Children will often go up. So will people on a vision quest. Depending on what message they get from God, I have seen people climb mountains. The evidence suggests Jacob Gray deliberately left his bike on Solduck Road and hiked into the Olympic Mountains high country, carrying only essential survival gear. Whether this was a planned spiritual journey, a response to mental health struggles, or something else entirely remains unknown. The arrows stuck in the ground may have been his way of marking a transition point, the end of his planned bicycle journey and the beginning of something else, Into the Vortex, 2010. Every family has its golden child, the one who seems to have it all figured out, who carries the weight of everyone's expectations with apparent ease. For Shelby and Patty McDaniel of Collierville, Tennessee, that child was their eldest son, Ben. Born on April 15, 1980, Benjamin Wayne McDaniel grew up in the kind of privileged comfort that should have set him up for success. His parents had built their wealth carefully, creating a life of opportunity for their 3 sons in the upscale Memphis suburb. Ben was everything parents dream of: tall, handsome, athletic, and naturally charismatic. At 6 feet 1 inch, with an easy smile and confident demeanour, he'd even done some modelling work, including an audition for Disney. He was the responsible older brother, the one who looked out for his 2 younger siblings, especially Paul, who shared his love for adventure and the outdoors. From an early age, Ben was drawn to physical challenges and exploration. As teenagers, he and Paul would spend hours rock climbing together, pushing each other to attempt more difficult routes. When Ben discovered scuba diving at 15, it became more than just a hobby. It was a passion that combined his love of adventure with the methodical precision that defined his personality. He would practice in the family's backyard pool, perfecting his technique with the same dedication he brought to everything else in his life. The McDaniel family had every reason to believe Ben's future was bright. He was smart, capable, and driven. After high school, he started his own construction business, showing the entrepreneurial spirit his parents had instilled in him. He got married, seemingly settling into the successful adult life everyone expected. The McDaniel name meant something in their community, and Ben was carrying it forward with pride. But life has a way of dismantling even the most carefully constructed plans. By the late 2000s, the cracks in Ben's perfect life were starting to show. His marriage, which had once seemed solid, began to crumble under pressures that friends and family could only guess at. The construction business that had been his pride and joy started failing, a victim of the economic downturn that hit the building industry particularly hard. As the business collapsed, Ben found himself facing nearly $50,000 in tax debts to both the IRS and the state of Tennessee. The divorce was messy and expensive, stripping away not just his marriage but much of his financial security. The business failure felt like a personal rejection of everything he'd worked to build. For someone who had always been seen as the successful one, the golden child who could do no wrong, these failures felt devastating. But nothing prepared the McDaniel family for what happened on a spring morning in 2008. Ben arrived at the family home to find his 22-year-old brother Paul unconscious. He tried desperately to revive him, performing CPR while paramedics rushed to the scene, but Paul was already gone. What the family initially believed was a stroke was later revealed to be something far more complicated: anoxic encephalopathy due to combined drug toxicity, a devastating combination of opiates and benzodiazepines that had shut down Paul's brain. Paul hadn't been prescribed opiates. The death of his climbing partner, his adventure buddy, his little brother, shattered something fundamental in Ben. He threw himself into supporting the foundation his parents established for stroke research, even though he knew the truth about Paul's death. He couldn't save his brother, couldn't save his marriage, couldn't save his business. The weight of all that failure was crushing the man who had once seemed capable of anything. By 2010, Ben was living back with his parents, a 30-year-old man trying to rebuild his life from the ruins of everything he'd lost. His parents, recognizing their son's pain, offered him what they hoped would be a lifeline: time and space to heal. They suggested he take a sabbatical at their beach house in Santa Rosa Beach, Florida, on the pristine Emerald Coast. They would support him financially while he figured out his next steps. All he had to do was take his dog, Spooner, a chocolate Labrador he'd rescued, and try to find himself again. Ben accepted their offer and moved to the beach house in April 2010. For the first time in years, he seemed to be finding some peace. The coastal location was perfect for someone who loved the water, and Ben quickly discovered Vortex Spring, about an hour north of Santa Rosa Beach near Ponce de Leon. The spring offered some of the clearest diving in Florida, with a constant water temperature of 68 degrees, fed by the Floridan aquifer. More importantly for Ben, Vortex Spring had caves. Cave diving represented everything Ben had always loved about adventure: the technical challenge, the physical demands, the element of risk that made success meaningful. He became a regular at the spring, diving several times a week, getting to know the staff and other frequent visitors. He told his parents he was working on mapping the cave system and considering getting certified as a diving instructor. For the first time since Paul's death, Ben seemed to have found something that gave him purpose. Chuck Cronin and Eduardo Terran, employees at the dive shop, came to know Ben well over those months. They saw him as knowledgeable and well-equipped, but also noticed something else, an overconfidence that sometimes worried them. Ben would talk about his abilities in ways that suggested he might be taking risks beyond his actual skill level. On the online diving forum Scuba Board, other divers who'd met Ben at Vortex Spring expressed similar concerns about his tendency to overestimate his capabilities. But Ben's parents saw these traits differently. To them, their son was simply returning to the confident, fearless person he'd always been. Ben was brave, his father would later say. Ben was fearless. He followed his passions. There was just one problem with Ben's new passion. He wasn't properly certified for cave diving. The sport requires specialized training, including 2 months of instruction and 125 supervised dives with a certified partner. The cave at Vortex Spring was protected by a locked gate at 115 feet down, 300 feet from the entrance. The key was only given to divers who could prove their cave diving certification. Ben didn't have that certification, but he'd apparently found ways around the restriction. Taryn suspected that Ben had been forcing the gate open on his solo dives, though he'd never confronted him about it directly. The cave beyond the gate was dangerous territory. It narrowed to just 10 inches in some places, requiring divers to remove their tanks and wriggle through spaces barely wide enough for a human body. A sign at the gate showed the Grim Reaper and warned, "Go no farther, there's nothing in this cave worth dying for." 13 divers had died in the cave during the 1990s, leading to threats from the state to ban diving there entirely. In mid-August 2010, 4 months into his sabbatical, Ben returned to Tennessee for a week-long visit. His parents and his girlfriend, Emily Greer, were encouraged by what they saw. Ben seemed optimistic for the first time in years. He talked about getting his instructor certification, about starting a diving-related business, about plans for the future. When he left to return to Florida on August 15th, he left behind a letter thanking his parents for their support and promising to take care of them as they grew older. None of them knew it would be goodbye. On August 18th, a Wednesday, Ben drove up to Vortex Spring for what would be his final visit. He spent the afternoon diving once, then sitting by the spring, testing equipment and making notes in his dive log. Other divers noticed him studying the cave entrance intently, as if planning something. He had the tanks filled at the dive shop and security cameras captured him making the transaction. As evening approached and temperatures cooled from the day's 90-degree heat, Ben prepared for another dive. He called his mother on his cell phone, the last conversation he would ever have with his family. Around 7:30 p.m, as the sun began to set, he entered the water. Cronin and Taryn were finishing their own dive when they saw Ben descending with his lights on, wearing a helmet, clear indicators he was heading into the cave. Taryn, who had long suspected Ben was forcing the gate, made a decision that would haunt him forever. He swam down to Ben and unlocked the gate, watching as Ben disappeared into the cave's depths. It was the last time anyone saw Ben McDaniel alive. For the McDaniel family, August 18th, 2010, became the day their world stopped making sense. Their eldest son, the one who was supposed to be healing, who was talking about the future again, had simply vanished into the earth. The sabbatical that was meant to save him had led him to a place where no one could follow. When Ben's truck was discovered still in the parking lot 2 days later, with his wallet containing over $1,000 in cash and his cell phone still inside, the McDaniel family's worst fears were confirmed. Their son, their golden child who had survived business failure and divorce and the devastating loss of his brother, had found something in those underwater caves that he couldn't survive. The irony was crushing. Ben had spent his life seeking challenges, pushing boundaries, testing himself against impossible odds. In the end, it was that same fearless spirit that had always defined him that led him into darkness from which he would never return. The Newlyweds' Secret, 1965. The call came into Atlanta Police on Friday morning, October 15th, 1965. Mary Shotwell Little had failed to show up for work at Citizens and Southern Bank's Mitchell Street branch. For anyone who knew Mary, This was cause for immediate alarm. The 25-year-old secretary was never late, never missed work without calling, and had never given her employer reason to doubt her reliability. Something was very wrong. Mary's boss didn't waste time. He first called the landlord at her apartment complex, who confirmed that her newspaper was still outside her door. When the landlord entered the empty apartment, it became clear that Mary hadn't come home the night before. The boss then reached out to the co-worker who had dined with Mary the previous evening, gathering the last known details of Mary's movements. That's when the search began in earnest. Security guards at Lenox Square shopping centre were asked to check the parking lots for Mary's metallic grey 1965 Mercury Comet. The first sweep came up empty, but when Mary's boss arrived at the mall around noon, he found the car exactly where the co-worker said it would be, in the yellow 32 section of the parking lot. What they discovered inside that car would turn a missing person case into one of Atlanta's most baffling mysteries. The Mercury Comet sat coated in a fine layer of red dust, the kind of Georgia clay that clings to everything it touches. The 4 bags of groceries Mary had purchased the night before were still in the back seat, along with bottles of Coca-Cola and a pack of Kent cigarettes, a usual brand. But it was what lay on the front console that made investigators' blood run cold. Neatly folded on the console were a slip, a pair of underwear and a girdle. On the floorboard, they found a bra and a single stocking that had been cut, possibly with a knife. The underwear showed evidence of recent wear and everything was confirmed to belong to Mary. None of her outer clothing, a sheath dress and white London fog raincoat, or her brown leather purse had been found. More disturbing was the blood. Not a large quantity, but enough to tell a story. Blood was smeared on the steering wheel, the driver's side door handle, the interior passenger window, and both front bucket seats. When tested, it matched Mary's blood type. An unidentified bloody fingerprint was discovered on the steering wheel, but it would prove useless in an era before computerized fingerprint databases. The staging of the scene immediately caught investigators' attention. The underwear was folded too neatly. The blood spread across too many surfaces in small amounts. Some officers believed the car had been deliberately arranged to suggest an assault. But if someone was staging evidence, why? The odometer provided another clue. 40 miles were unaccounted for since Mary's last known trip. The car had been driven approximately 20 miles from Lenox Square and then returned. But why would an attacker risk coming back to the scene? The answer seemed obvious to some investigators. The perpetrator's own vehicle was still in the lot. This theory gained weight when police checked overnight parking citations. Cars left in the lot were routinely ticketed, but Mary's car hadn't received a citation, confirming it wasn't there when security made their rounds early Friday morning. Someone had returned it between then and noon. 24 hours after Mary's car was discovered, her credit card was used at an Esso gas station in Charlotte, North Carolina, her hometown. The attendant remembered the transaction clearly because of the woman who made it. She had blood on her head and legs, appeared distressed, and was accompanied by 1 or 2 unshaven, middle-aged men who seemed to be controlling her movements. The woman tried to hide her face and never asked for help. 12 hours later, Mary's credit card was used again at another Esso station in Raleigh, North Carolina. Again, the signature read Mrs. Wroe Little Jr. and appeared to match Mary's handwriting. The second attendant provided a similar description. A woman with injuries, clearly in distress, accompanied by men who appeared to be her captors. The timeline puzzled investigators. Charlotte and Raleigh were only 2 to 3 hours apart by car, yet 12 hours had elapsed between the charges. What had happened during those missing hours? Even more troubling, the license plate number recorded on the credit card slips had been reported stolen in the days before Mary's disappearance. The North Carolina sightings triggered a ransom demand. Wroe Little, Mary's husband of just 6 weeks, received a call demanding $20,000 for his wife's safe return. But the caller never contacted the family again, and the FBI dismissed it as a hoax designed to exploit the family's desperation. Investigators began developing profiles of potential suspects. Wroe Little himself came under scrutiny, as spouses always do in such cases. He'd been out of town on business when Mary disappeared, but some found his behaviour afterward troubling. He reportedly seemed more concerned about getting his car back than finding his wife, and he twice refused to take a polygraph test. However, the North Carolina sightings and the complexity of the crime scene suggested this wasn't a simple domestic violence case. A random predator theory also emerged when investigators learned about another incident at Lenox Square that same evening. A young woman reported that a man had approached her car around 8 p.m, claiming her tyre was flat and trying to get her to open her door. She'd refused and driven away, later discovering all her tyres were fine. Had there been a tyre man prowling the parking lot that night? But this theory fell apart under scrutiny. A random attacker would have no reason to stage Mary's car or drive her to her hometown in North Carolina. He certainly wouldn't risk returning the vehicle to the scene. The evidence suggested someone who knew Mary personally. The weeks before Mary's disappearance revealed troubling patterns. Co-workers reported that she'd been receiving unwanted phone calls at work. They'd overheard her side of conversations where she said things like, "I'm a married woman now and you can come to my house, but I can't come there." The calls suggested someone from her past who couldn't accept her new married status. More ominously, Mary had received 5 red roses at work the week before she disappeared. The florist was located near her apartment, but the flowers were sent to her office. In the language of flowers, 5 red roses mean "I love and admire you deeply." Someone was sending Mary a very specific message. Mary's behaviour in those final weeks also changed. She seemed nervous about being alone, whether at home or in her car. Friends noticed she appeared to be looking over her shoulder, as if she sensed she was being watched. The newlywed who should have been in the happiest time of her life was clearly afraid. The investigation took a shocking turn 18 months later, with the murder of Diane Shields. Diane had been hired to replace Mary at Citizens and Southern Bank. She not only worked at Mary's former desk, but had moved in with some of Mary's former roommates. Like Mary, Diane was young, attractive, and recently engaged. Diane's body was found in the trunk of her car in East Point, just 5 miles from Atlanta's airport. She'd been strangled with a scarf and paper stuffed in her throat. Her diamond engagement ring was still on her finger, and she hadn't been sexually assaulted. Most tellingly, Diane had received 5 red roses the week before her murder. The connection was too obvious to ignore. Someone was targeting young women connected to Mary's position at the bank. But was Diane simply in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or had she discovered something about Mary's disappearance that got her killed? Rumours swirled that Diane had been working as an undercover informant, trying to help solve Mary's case. Her family members later claimed she'd been gathering information about what happened to Mary. If true, it suggested police believed Mary's disappearance was connected to someone at the bank. Law enforcement has always denied this claim. The investigation into Mary's case faced another blow when, 2 years after her disappearance, her mother requested that authorities cease their search. Shortly afterward, the case file itself disappeared from police headquarters, as if someone wanted to ensure the investigation could never be reopened effectively. Expert profilers who've studied the case point to several key factors: the personal nature of the crime, the stalking behaviour, the symbolic roses, the targeting of women connected to Mary's position, suggests someone who knew her well. The ability to make the case file disappear and the sophisticated staging of evidence points to someone with significant influence or connections. The North Carolina sightings remain the most puzzling aspect of the case. If Mary was taken against her will, her captors went to extraordinary lengths to be seen with her in public. Some experts believe this was designed to direct the investigation away from Atlanta, suggesting local knowledge of police procedures. The most compelling theory centers on a stalker with connections to Citizens and Southern Bank, either an employee, customer, or someone with access to bank personnel information. This person would have known Mary's background, her hometown, and her daily routines. The marriage to Wroe Little may have triggered an escalation from obsession to violence. The careful staging of the car, the return to the parking lot, and the ability to make evidence disappear suggests someone with significant resources and local influence. In 1960s, Atlanta Citizens and Southern Bank was one of the most powerful financial institutions in the Southeast, funding much of the city's rapid development. Summit Without Return, 2018. At exactly 8 a.m. on Wednesday, August 1st, 2018, Samantha Sayers kissed her boyfriend Kevin Dares goodbye at their Belltown apartment in Seattle. She was heading out for what should have been a routine solo day hike to Vesper Peak in the North Cascades, about 2 hours north of the city. Sam had done this hike before, multiple times. She knew the trail, knew the terrain, and most importantly, she knew her own capabilities. "I'll be back by 6 tonight," she told Kevin, shouldering her blue backpack. It was the kind of promise Sam always kept. She was methodical about her hiking plans, sticking to timelines with military precision. Kevin watched her load her dark grey Honda Accord with her gear, 2 hiking poles, a beige sun hat, a dark grey wool beanie, and enough water and snacks for a 10-hour adventure. As Sam drove north on Highway 2, Kevin sent her a final text. "I know you don't need me to tell you this, but the terrain can be dangerous." Her response came back quickly. "I know, I love you." It was the last message she would ever send. By 8:30 a.m, Sam had reached the Vesper Peak trailhead parking area near Spader Lake. The morning was warming up, promising another scorching August day with temperatures climbing toward 90 degrees. She parked her Honda, grabbed her pack, and started up the trail that she'd conquered numerous times before. Sam was impossible to miss on the mountain. At 5 feet 8 inches tall, with a completely bald head covered in intricate star tattoos, she stood out among other hikers. The tattoos weren't just decoration, they were symbols of strength, designed by her mother Lisa to help Sam embrace the alopecia that had taken her hair during high school. Today she wore dark grey pants and a maroon hoodie, practical gear for a day that would start cool and end hot. The first confirmed sighting came around mid-morning. Other hikers noticed the tall, bald woman with the easy smile making steady progress up the steep switchbacks. She was moving at her usual determined pace, hiking poles clicking rhythmically against the rocky trail. Nothing seemed unusual. Sam appeared relaxed, confident, in her element. At 11:45 a.m, roughly 3.5 hours into her hike, Sam encountered another solo hiker who would later become a crucial witness. They shared lunch together on the trail, Sam eating one of her typical sandwiches while they chatted about the beautiful weather and the challenging terrain ahead. The witness described Sam as cheerful and well prepared, showing no signs of distress or uncertainty about the route. After lunch, Sam continued her ascent while her lunch companion decided to turn back. It was the last time anyone would see Samantha Sayers behaving normally. At 3 p.m, exactly 7 hours after leaving her apartment, Sam reached the summit of Vesper Peak. Another hiker spotted her there, taking in the panoramic views of the Cascade Range spread out below. The witness would later tell investigators that Sam seemed to be preparing for her descent, organising her gear and checking her equipment. The summit of Vesper Peak sits at 6,214 feet above sea level, offering breathtaking views but also presenting serious dangers. To the south lies a steep scramble route down rocky terrain. To the north, the mountain drops away into glacial crevasses and Vesper Lake, a pristine alpine tarn surrounded by near vertical granite walls. The witness noted that Sam appeared to be studying the southern descent route, the same path she'd taken on previous hikes. Then something went wrong. By 6 p.m, Sam should have been back at her car. The descent from Vesper's summit typically takes 2 to 3 hours for an experienced hiker like Sam. Her parking spot remained empty, her Honda sitting alone as shadows began to lengthen across the valley. At 7 p.m, Kevin's phone remained silent. Sam was now an hour overdue, something that had never happened before. Kevin knew his girlfriend's habits. She was compulsive about sticking to schedules, especially when it came to hiking safety. By 7:15 p.m, he was in his car racing north toward the mountains with a growing sense of dread. Kevin's first stop was a gas station where he bought a cheap flashlight and some batteries. He had no hiking gear with him, no proper equipment for a mountain rescue, but he couldn't wait for professional help. Every minute that passed meant Sam was spending another minute alone in the wilderness as darkness fell. At 10 p.m, Kevin reached the Vesper Peak trailhead. Sam's Honda was still there, confirming his worst fears. He began climbing the trail in darkness, calling her name and shining his inadequate flashlight into the forest. Within hours, the cheap flashlight died, leaving him stumbling through the dark Cascade wilderness with nothing but his cell phone's weak LED. At 1 a.m. on August 2nd, 17 hours after Sam had started her hike, Kevin made the call that would trigger one of Washington's most extensive search operations. "My girlfriend went hiking alone yesterday morning and never came back," he told the 911 dispatcher. "Her car is still at the trailhead. Something's very wrong." The Snohomish County Sheriff's Office immediately activated their search and rescue protocols. By sunrise on August 2nd, the first teams were heading up Vesper Peak while helicopters prepared for aerial reconnaissance. The clock was now ticking not just on finding Sam, but on finding her alive. Day 2 brought canine teams and thermal imaging helicopters. The dogs picked up Sam's scent on the main trail but lost it near the summit area. FLIR cameras detected heat signatures that turned out to be rocks, still warm from the previous day's sun, deer, and other false alarms. Search teams rappelled down cliff faces and explored every crevasse within a mile of the summit. Day 3 expanded the search area as the grim reality set in. If Sam had fallen or become injured near the summit, she should have been found by now. Teams began exploring the possibility that she'd somehow descended the wrong side of the mountain or taken an alternate route back to the valley. By day 5, over a dozen agencies were involved in the search. Helicopters logged 33 hours of flight time over the weekend alone. Marine units deployed boats on Spader Lake to search areas accessible only by water. Drones equipped with cameras explored dangerous terrain too risky for human searchers. Day 7 brought Sam's parents, Lisa and Ron, flying in from Pennsylvania. Lisa took one look at the mountain and understood why her daughter hadn't been found. "The paths are pretty wide, but there are areas where there are cliffs," she told reporters. "She hikes hard, she's a beast. People don't realise how rugged it is." Day 14 was Sam's 28th birthday. She'd planned to celebrate with an especially challenging hike, her way of marking another year of life through physical achievement. Instead, search teams marked the day by expanding their efforts into even more remote areas, following every possible route Sam might have taken. Day 21 brought a devastating decision. After logging 357 hours of air operations, 105 hours of drone flights, 82 hours of marine unit support, and 329 hours of ground search time, officials had exhausted every lead. "We have checked and double-checked the possible routes we believe Sam could have taken," said Search and Rescue Sergeant John Adams. "If there was a place we thought she could get to, we put people there." On day 22, August 23, 2018, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office officially suspended search operations. They'd spent thousands of hours and significant resources without finding any trace of Samantha Sayers beyond her abandoned car. But Kevin refused to accept that the search was over. As official operations wound down, volunteer mountaineering groups stepped up. Private drones continued to scan the mountain's most inaccessible areas. The Facebook group #Find Sam Sayers grew to thousands of members, coordinating ongoing search efforts and analysing every possible clue. Day 30 brought a haunting discovery: a possible boot print in mud near Vesper Lake, at the base of the mountain's dangerous north face. The print appeared to match Sam's hiking boots, but the location made no sense. How would she have reached that remote spot? And if she'd made it that far, where was she now? Day 150 marked the end of the hiking season as winter snows began to blanket the high country. Kevin had spent nearly every day on the mountain, his faith in finding Sam alive gradually eroded by the relentless passage of time and the mountain's stubborn silence. Day 365 brought Lisa Sayers back to Washington, now battling cancer but still refusing to give up hope. "Until there is proof, my daughter is alive," she insisted. "We're going to keep searching." The clock continues to tick for Samantha Sayers, marking time that grows more precious with each passing day. Christmas Eve Mystery, 2016. In the hiking community, they're called trail names, nicknames earned through experiences, personality, or memorable moments along the path. But some trail names carry more weight than others. Today, when Pacific Crest Trail hikers see someone wearing a bandana with a distinctive pattern, or when they spot volunteer searchers posting flyers at Trail Angels stops, they know they're looking at the continuing legacy of Sherpa, Chris Fowler, whose disappearance in 2016 changed how America thinks about missing hikers. The ripple effects of what happened to Chris on October 12, 2016, near White Pass in Washington, continue to spread outward like circles on water. His story has transformed hiking safety protocols, created support networks for families of the missing, and sparked a movement that has likely saved lives. But to understand the full impact of his disappearance, we need to go back to the beginning. Chris Fowler was completing what should have been the adventure of a lifetime. The 34-year-old from Ohio had been hiking the Pacific Crest Trail since May, covering over 2,200 miles from Mexico toward Canada. He was methodical, prepared, and experienced. At every resupply stop, he'd check in with his family, maintaining the promise he'd made to his stepmother Sally. contact every 2 weeks, without fail. On that October morning, Chris was dropped off at the Cracker Barrel store near White Pass, just 366 miles from completing his 650-mile journey. Store clerk saw him grab coffee and head back toward the trail. His phone shut off about an hour later. Not unusual for hikers trying to preserve battery life. But October 12th was different. A massive storm was approaching, the remnants of Typhoon Songda, described as the biggest weather event to hit Washington in 15 to 20 years. Most experienced hikers had already left the trail or hitchhiked around the dangerous section to finish their journeys safely. But Chris, determined to complete every mile on foot, walked straight into the storm wearing only Chaco sandals, the same footwear he'd worn for the entire 200-mile journey. When Sally Fowler realized on October 31st that she hadn't heard from Chris in 3 weeks, her world began to collapse. The man who had never missed a check-in, who had kept his word for over 5 months on the trail, had simply vanished. Phone calls to friends, family and other hikers confirmed what Sally feared. No one had seen or heard from Chris since mid-October. What followed was a massive search operation involving multiple counties, agencies and hundreds of volunteers. Helicopters logged over 350 hours of flight time. Ground crews spent weeks combing through snow-covered wilderness. Marine units searched lakes and rivers. After 22 days, with winter conditions making further searches impossible, the official effort was suspended. But Sally Fowler refused to accept that her son was gone, and in that refusal, something extraordinary began to happen. The Facebook group Bring Chris Fowler Sherpa Home grew from a few dozen members to over 7,300 people. Hikers, search and rescue volunteers, and families who understood the unique pain of having a loved one disappear in the wilderness. The group became more than just a search effort. It became a community of mutual support and shared purpose. What made Sally's approach different was her focus on prevention. Instead of only looking backward at what went wrong, she began looking forward at how to keep it from happening again. Her posts on hiking forums and social media consistently emphasized practical safety advice. Carry proper winter gear, use GPS devices instead of relying only on cell phones, check weather forecasts, and have backup communication plans. Hikers started calling her Trail Mum, and the responses were overwhelming. "I've had people tell me that they are alive today because of my posts," Sally explained. "It's the paying it forward that has pushed me through all of this." The safety initiatives that grew from Chris's disappearance were concrete and measurable. Sign-in sheets were implemented at checkpoints along the PCT, creating better tracking of hiker movements. The Pacific Crest Trail Association began emphasizing emergency communication devices in their safety materials. Local businesses along the trail started keeping better records of hiker interactions. But the most significant change came in 2017 when another hiker disappeared under similar circumstances. David O'Sullivan, a 25-year-old from Ireland, vanished while hiking the PCT near the San Jacinto Mountains in California. His family faced the same devastating questions, the same bureaucratic challenges, and the same overwhelming sense of helplessness that Sally had experienced. Instead of allowing another family to navigate this nightmare alone, Sally reached out to David's parents, Con and Carmel O'Sullivan. Together, they recognized that missing hiker cases presented unique challenges that existing support systems weren't equipped to handle. Families often lived thousands of miles from where their loved one disappeared. They didn't understand wilderness search procedures. They struggled with when to trust expensive private search teams and when to be cautious of scammers preying on their desperation. In November 2020, Sally and the O'Sullivan family launched the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation, creating the first organization specifically designed to help families of missing hikers. Their mission statement was clear. With safety and compassion as our core principles, the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation provides assistance to families of missing hikers, connects them to vetted resources, facilitates searches on their behalf once official efforts have been suspended, and supports initiatives to prevent future missing hiker cases. The Foundation's impact was immediate and practical. They developed a network of vetted search resources, ending the guesswork for desperate families trying to figure out who to trust. They provided funding for searches that official agencies could no longer support. Most importantly, they offered what Sally called the roadmap. guidance on how to work with law enforcement, organize volunteer searches, manage media attention, and navigate the complex emotions of an open-ended loss. The Foundation also launched preventative search and rescue programs, donating GPS devices to hikers each year in the name of missing persons. They created educational materials about wilderness safety and funded research into why experienced hikers disappear. Every program was designed to ensure that other families wouldn't have to endure what the Fowlers and O'Sullivans had experienced. Sergeant Randy Briscoe of the Yakima County Sheriff's Office, who led the initial search for Chris, delayed his retirement for an entire year, hoping to solve the case before leaving. When he finally retired on January 15, 2021, Chris's birthday, he'd spent thousands of hours following every lead, some as far away as South America. "There's nothing we haven't tried," he said. "It's all become very personal to me." The Foundation's peer support groups connected families across the country who shared the unique trauma of having a loved one vanish in the wilderness. These weren't just support groups. They were networks of people who understood the specific challenges of searching vast wilderness areas, dealing with seasonal access limitations, and managing the hope and despair that comes with cases that may never be solved. By 2022, the Foundation was providing guidance to families of missing hikers across multiple states. Their website featured detailed case studies, safety resources, and testimonials from families who had navigated successful searches with the Foundation's help. The organization had grown from Sally's determination to find her son into a systematic approach to a problem that affects dozens of families each year. The safety education programs reached thousands of hikers annually. At trail festivals, PCT Days events, and through social media campaigns, the Foundation distributed information that likely prevented dozens of disappearances. The simple message: carry proper gear, use GPS devices, have backup communication plans, was directly attributed to hikers making safer decisions in dangerous situations. Perhaps most importantly, the Foundation changed how law enforcement agencies approach missing hiker cases. By providing families with clear guidance on what information to gather and how to present it to authorities, cases were being taken seriously more quickly. The Foundation's vetted resource network meant that private search efforts were more professional and effective, complementing rather than interfering with official investigations. The annual August searches for Chris became rallying points for the entire missing hiker community. Volunteers would travel from across the country to participate, often wearing bandanas with Chris's image, honouring Sally's request that hikers carry his picture to the PCT's northern terminus. These searches served multiple purposes. They continued the active search for Chris. They trained volunteers in wilderness search techniques, and they demonstrated the hiking community's commitment to never leaving anyone behind. The Foundation's work attracted attention from major news outlets, hiking publications, and safety organizations. Sally's story was featured on Dateline NBC, bringing national attention to the issue of missing hikers and the resources available to families. The coverage led to more families reaching out for help and more volunteers joining search efforts. In the years following Chris's disappearance, hiking gear manufacturers began incorporating lessons learned from missing hiker cases into their product development. GPS devices became more affordable and user-friendly. Emergency communication devices were marketed more aggressively to solo hikers. Trail apps began incorporating better emergency features and location-sharing capabilities. The cultural impact was equally significant. The hiking community's approach to solo travel evolved, with more emphasis on communication plans and safety protocols. Trail angels, volunteers who provide support to hikers, became more systematic about recording interactions with hikers, creating better records of who passed through their areas and when. The Foundation's influence extended beyond hiking into broader wilderness safety policy. Their research and advocacy contributed to improved missing person protocols in national and state parks. Their work with families helped shape how agencies communicate with loved ones during search operations. Today, when a hiker goes missing anywhere in the United States, the Fowler O'Sullivan Foundation is often among the first resources that families discover. The organization that began with one stepmother's refusal to give up hope has become an essential part of America's wilderness safety infrastructure. The bandanas with Chris's image continue to appear on trails across the country, carried by hikers who never met him, but understand that his story represents something larger than one family's tragedy. They represent a community's commitment to safety, to supporting each other, and to ensuring that no one disappears without people fighting to bring them home. The group that scattered 2015. There are moments that cleave time in half. Creating a before and after that can never be reconciled. For 4 adults at Timber Creek Campground, that moment came on July 10th, 2015, sometime between 2 o'clock and 2:30 p.m, when they realised 2-year-old Dior Kun Jr. was no longer among them. But what happened in that window of time depends entirely on who's telling the story, and when they're telling it. Then, the morning of July 10th, 2015, the family camping trip had started with such promise. Vernal Dior Kun Sr., 24, and his girlfriend Jessica Mitchell, 25, had decided on a last-minute adventure to Timber Creek Campground in the Salmon Chalice National Forest. Their 2-year-old son, Dior Jr., was excited about his first real camping experience. Joining them were Dior's great-grandfather, 77-year-old Robert Walton, and Walton's friend, 43-year-old Isaac Reinwand, whom Dior and Jessica had never met before. The morning was peaceful. Little Dior helped his parents around the campsite, his blonde hair catching the sunlight as he toddled around in his camouflage jacket, blue pajama pants and tiny cowboy boots. He clutched his blanket, sippy cup and favourite toy monkey, the 3 items he never went anywhere without. At this moment, in this version of events, Dior was happy, safe, and surrounded by adults who cared about him. Now, the investigation room, January 2016. Detective work is about inconsistencies, and by January 2016, the inconsistencies in the Dior Kun Jr. case had become impossible to ignore. Sheriff Lynn Bowerman sat across from reporters, his face grave as he announced that Dior's parents were now considered suspects in their son's disappearance. "Mum and Dad are being less than truthful," Bowerman stated. "We've interviewed them multiple times, and every time there are changes to parts of their story. The little things all change every time we speak with them." The investigation had revealed something disturbing. Both parents had failed multiple polygraph tests. Vernal failed 5 separate examinations. Jessica failed 4. In the words of private investigator Philip Klein, whom the family had initially hired to help find Dior, "In my 26 years, I've never heard of a person failing that bad." Then, the split up July 10th, 2 p.m. This is where the stories begin to fracture, where 4 adults who were supposedly caring for 1 toddler suddenly have completely different memories of the same 30 minutes. Jessica's version. She asked her great-grandfather, Robert Walton, to watch Dior while she and Vernal took a walk around the campground to explore. She assumed Walton understood and agreed. When they returned, Dior was gone. Walton's version. He never heard Jessica ask him to watch Dior. He was resting alone in the trailer when the commotion started. He saw Dior near the creek at some point, but when he looked away briefly, the child had vanished. Vernal's version. This changed with each telling. Sometimes he was with Jessica when they asked Walton to watch Dior. Sometimes he was down by the creek. Sometimes he was helping Walton with something at the trailer. Reinwand's version. He'd gone down to the nearby creek to fish, alone. Dior was not with him. He knew nothing about any arrangements for watching the child. 4 adults, 1 missing toddler. 4 completely different stories about a 30-minute window of time. Now, the private investigation, 2016. Philip Klein had initially taken the case believing he would help a devastated family find their missing child. By 2016, his conclusion was damning. All evidence leads to the death of Dior Kun Jr. We do not believe a kidnapping or animal attack occurred, and all evidence supports this finding. Klein's investigation had uncovered disturbing details that cast doubt on the family's version of events. When Vernal and Jessica were evicted from their Idaho Falls home in 2016 for failing to pay rent, they left behind several items, including the camouflage jacket that Dior was allegedly wearing when he disappeared. More troubling was Klein's assessment of Jessica's behaviour. She knows where the body is, he concluded, though he never provided evidence to support this explosive claim. Then, the 911 call, July 10th, 2:28 p.m. The desperation in Jessica Mitchell's voice seemed genuine as she called 911. "Hi, we're at Timber Creek Campground and we can't find our 2-year-old son." At this moment in time, search and rescue coordinators still believed they were looking for a lost child. The massive response was immediate. Horses, ATVs, helicopters, canine units, and nearly 200 volunteers combing a 2.5-mile radius around the campground. They searched the creek 15 yards from the campsite dozens of times. They used sonar robots in the nearby stone reservoir. They brought in the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. In this version of events, Dior was a curious toddler who had somehow wandered away from camp and gotten lost in the vast Idaho wilderness. Every searcher believed they were racing against time to find a living child. Now, the experts' assessment 2017. By 2017, the experts had reached their conclusions, and none of them involved a lost child scenario. Dr. Todd Garrison, who had analysed the case, noted that the physical evidence didn't support any of the family's changing narratives. No scent trails leading away from the campsite, no evidence of an animal attack, no signs that Dior had ever walked to the creek on his own. The searchers who had spent weeks combing the wilderness came to believe they had been looking for someone who was never there to be found. The extensive searches, covering terrain that would have been impossible for a 2-year-old to navigate, had turned up nothing because there was nothing to find in those mountains. Then, the family's plea, July 13, 2015. 3 days after Dior's disappearance, his parents gave their only joint interview. Sitting side by side, they appeared devastated, desperate, and completely bewildered by their son's vanishing. "We don't believe he's lost anymore," Jessica said, tears streaming down her face. "We believe someone has our son, and we want him back." Vernal nodded in agreement, his voice breaking as he made a direct plea. "Whoever has him, just please bring him back. Please." At that moment, watching these parents on camera, most viewers saw a mother and father destroyed by the worst nightmare any parent could imagine. Their pain appeared real, their desperation genuine. Now, the cold reality, 2019 to present. Robert Walton, the great-grandfather whose conflicting statements had been part of the investigation, died in 2019, taking his version of events to the grave. Isaac Reinwand, the family friend who barely knew the family before that fateful camping trip, has remained largely silent over the years. Jessica Mitchell has since remarried and moved on with her life, but she maintains her innocence. "We don't know where he is," she's repeatedly stated. Vernal Kuntz has similarly denied any involvement in his son's disappearance. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children continues to update age progression photos of Dior, now showing what he might look like as a 10-year-old. But these efforts feel increasingly symbolic rather than practical. No charges have ever been filed. No arrests have been made. No physical evidence of a crime has been discovered. The case remains officially open, but with no new leads and no new evidence, it exists in a state of suspended animation. Then and now, the unresolved truth. The parallel narratives of Dior Kun Jr. S. disappearance can never be reconciled because they exist in fundamentally different realities. In one reality, a family went camping and their beloved toddler wandered away and was lost forever in the Idaho wilderness. In the other reality, something far more sinister occurred at that remote campsite, and 4 adults have maintained a conspiracy of silence for nearly a decade. The dramatic irony lies in what each version reveals about the other. If the family is telling the truth, then law enforcement spent years destroying innocent people who were already suffering the worst loss imaginable. If the investigators are correct, then a massive search effort involving hundreds of volunteers was orchestrated around a lie, with searchers risking their lives looking for a child who was never missing in the way they believed. Grandmother Trina Clegg's words capture the impossible nature of this case. "We will do everything we can until the day we all die to find him." But the question that hangs over everything is whether the family is searching for a lost child or maintaining a story that prevents the truth from ever being discovered. The two timelines, then and now, the disappearance and the investigation, run parallel to each other, never intersecting at the point where truth should emerge. Somewhere in the space between these narratives lies the answer to what happened to Dior Kun Jr., but it remains as elusive as the 2-year-old who vanished from Timber Creek Campground on a July afternoon that changed 4 lives forever. Crater Lake's Mystery, 1974. When 2 Texas hikers made a wrong turn on October 13, 1976, they stumbled into one of Crater Lake National Park's most enduring mysteries. Walking along what they thought was the Pacific Crest Trail, the pair found themselves in the remote Sphagnum Bog area, far from any established route. There, caught on some brush, was a torn and weathered backpack that would crack open a case that had baffled investigators for nearly 2 years. The discovery was routine enough that the hikers simply turned the abandoned pack over to park headquarters the next day. Rangers Larry Smith and Marion Jack began the standard procedure of inventorying the contents. A few scattered items, some torn fabric, nothing that seemed particularly significant. But when Jack unzipped a side pocket, his fingers closed around a single metal object that would change everything: a Volkswagen car key. The key itself was unremarkable, but its presence triggered a memory. Nearly 2 years earlier, a young photographer named Charles McCullough had vanished somewhere in the vast wilderness of Crater Lake. His father had provided investigators with detailed information about his son's possessions, including photocopies of his car keys. When Rangers Smith and Jack overlaid the found key with the McCullough file copy, they witnessed what Jack later described as an electric charge. The keys matched perfectly. Within hours, Rangers Marion Jack and Dave Lang were leading a horse patrol toward the area where the backpack had been discovered. The terrain was challenging even for experienced horsemen, steep, densely forested, and accessible only by following game trails through the wilderness. At 1:30 p.m, the radio crackled with the words everyone had been waiting to hear: "We have found him." But what they found raised more questions than it answered. Charles McCullough's remains were scattered along a steep embankment in the Bybee Creek drainage, roughly 12 miles from the park's north entrance. The scene was so unusual that one 30-year veteran ranger called it the strangest thing he'd ever encountered. Charles appeared to have simply melted into his jeans while sitting on a log. His pants were intact but unbuttoned, his belt undone. Inside the pants' legs were socks containing foot bones, ending abruptly with broken pieces of tibia. The rest of his body had seemingly vanished. A thorough search of the area turned up only scattered bone fragments and the crown of his skull about 12 feet away. No shirt was found, no coat. Most puzzling of all, no boots. As one investigator noted, rangers always find the boots. They're essential for wilderness travel, animals don't take them, and they can last for a century. The discovery forced investigators to reconstruct Charles's final journey, and nothing about it made sense. Charles Wood McCullough, 19 years old and from Alexandria, Virginia, had begun his cross-country adventure in January 1975. A dedicated photographer, he'd left his beloved Volkswagen at home and set out with professional-grade camera equipment, expensive gear that represented a significant investment for a teenager. His plan was simple: hitchhike and ride buses across America, capturing unique photographs along the way. By late January 1975, Charles had made it to Eugene, Oregon, where he stayed with a friend for several weeks. On January 29th, he announced his intention to make a short trip to Crater Lake for winter photography, promising to return by February 3rd. He hitchhiked north, carrying his camera gear and enough supplies for what should have been a 4-day excursion. Charles was last seen at the Dray Creek store near Diamond Lake, about 20 miles from Crater Lake's north entrance. Store clerks remembered the young photographer, asking about road conditions to the park. They told him the north entrance was closed for winter, as it had been since the first heavy snows in December. The main park road was impassable, buried under several feet of snow. But Charles was undeterred. Witnesses saw him walking toward the park boundary, camera equipment in hand, apparently planning to hike the 20 miles to Crater Lake despite winter conditions that would challenge even experienced mountaineers. The first major storm hit the area within hours of Charles's departure. 34 inches of fresh snow fell in the first wave, followed by additional storms that brought the total snowpack to over 140 inches, nearly 12 feet. Search aircraft couldn't penetrate the weather, and ground searches were impossible in the conditions. Charles's father, Charles E. McCullough, flew to Oregon twice during 1975, spending weeks searching for his son. Private aircraft logged dozens of hours flying search patterns over the park. The FBI opened an investigation. Uncashed travelers' checks and unclaimed money orders proved Charles had never reached his planned destinations. After months of searching, most investigators concluded the young man had died in an avalanche or fallen into a snow-covered crevasse where his body would never be found. The discovery of his remains in October 1976 forced investigators to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the case. The first problem was the location. Charles's body was found 12 miles from the north entrance, in terrain that would have been virtually impossible to traverse in winter conditions. The route to Bybee Creek would have required crossing several ridgelines, navigating dense forest, and somehow covering 12 miles in 8.5 feet of fresh snow. No human being could have walked that distance in such conditions without proper winter equipment, snowshoes, skis, or at minimum survival gear designed for extreme cold. The second problem was the missing equipment. Charles had been carrying expensive camera gear, professional quality equipment that would have been valuable even in 1975. None of it was ever found. His money was gone. His warm clothing had vanished. The young man who had set out properly equipped for a winter photography expedition had somehow ended up in the wilderness wearing only pants and socks. Investigators developed several theories to explain the evidence, but none satisfied all the facts. The official theory centered on hypothermia-induced disorientation. When people freeze to death, they often experience paradoxical undressing, a phenomenon where victims remove their clothing as their core temperature drops and their brain function deteriorates. This could explain why Charles's coat and shirt were missing and why his pants were unbuttoned. But this theory required Charles to have somehow travelled 12 miles through deep snow in deteriorating mental condition. Even if he'd followed snowmobile tracks, as some suggested, the machines weren't permitted in that area of the park. Moreover, the fresh snowfall would have made snowmobile travel impossible. The powder was too deep and soft to support the machines. A more sinister theory emerged when investigators considered the missing camera equipment. Charles's father remained convinced his son had been the victim of foul play, arguing that robbers had killed Charles for his valuable gear, then transported his body to the remote location to hide the evidence. This would explain the missing equipment and the impossible location. Proponents of this theory pointed to several suspicious elements. Charles's pants were unbuttoned as if someone had searched his pockets. The careful placement of his body on a log suggested human involvement rather than a natural death. Most compelling was the fact that his boots were missing, something that would have been valuable to criminals but unnecessary if Charles had died from exposure. However, the murder theory had significant problems. Moving a body 12 miles into wilderness terrain would have required enormous effort and knowledge of the area. The location was so remote that even experienced park rangers needed horses to access it. Why would criminals choose such a difficult hiding place when dozens of easier locations were available? A third theory suggested that Charles had encountered someone who offered him transportation deeper into the park. Perhaps he'd accepted a ride with individuals who later robbed and killed him. This would explain both the impossible journey and the missing equipment. But if this were true, Charles had met the unluckiest Good Samaritans in Oregon history. FBI investigators brought advanced forensic techniques to bear on the evidence, but the scene had been compromised by nearly 2 years of weather and animal activity. Wildlife had scattered the remains, making it impossible to determine the exact cause of death. The broken tibias suggested trauma, but whether from a fall, violence, or post-mortem animal activity remained unclear. Doctor investigators noted that the location where Charles was found sat at the bottom of a steep embankment with a 60% grade. It was possible he'd fallen from the ridge above, explaining the broken bones and scattered remains. But this still didn't explain how he'd reached the area in the first place. The medical examiner ultimately ruled Charles's death as resulting from natural causes, citing hypothermia as the most likely explanation. But investigators privately acknowledged that the ruling was more about closing the case than reflecting certainty about what had actually happened. David Paulides, author of the Missing 411 series, later included Charles McCullough's case in his research on mysterious disappearances in national parks. Paulides noted several unusual elements that fit patterns he'd identified in other cases. The victim was a young, physically fit male. He disappeared in an area where other people had vanished. His body was found in a location that seemed impossible to reach under the circumstances, and valuable items were missing while less valuable items remained. The Crater Lake Institute's chronological history notes that Charles's case remains conjecture nearly 50 years later. The organization's records include eyewitness accounts from the rangers who discovered the remains, and their descriptions continue to puzzle experts decades later. Retired Chief Ranger Dan Scholle, who supervised the investigation, later reflected on the case's enduring mysteries. While he officially accepted the hypothermia explanation, Sholly privately acknowledged that significant questions remained unanswered. The combination of impossible terrain, missing valuable equipment, and the unusual condition of the remains made Charles McCullough's death one of the most puzzling cases in his 30-year career. The investigation officially closed with Charles's death certificate, but the mystery lives on in the detailed records maintained by park historians. Every winter, when snow closes the roads around Crater Lake, rangers remember the young photographer who somehow travelled 12 impossible miles through a blizzard, carrying expensive equipment that vanished without a trace. The Father's Day trip, 1958. In the summer of 1958, the world still seemed like a safe place for children. Dwight Eisenhower was president, families left their doors unlocked, and parents sent their kids off to summer camp with nothing more than a packed suitcase and a promise to write home. For Sergeant Joseph Bizup of the Denver Police Department and his wife, sending their 10-year-old son Bobby to Camp St. Malo that August represented everything good about childhood: adventure, independence, and the kind of character-building experience that would help their deaf boy navigate a world that wasn't always understanding of his differences. Bobby Bizup was not just any 10-year-old. Born with profound hearing loss, he had learned to communicate through a combination of lip reading, sign language, and the pure determination that seemed to define his personality. His parents had raised him to believe that his deafness was not a limitation, but simply another aspect of who he was. At home in Denver, Bobby was known for his infectious smile, his love of the outdoors, and his remarkable ability to connect with people despite the communication barriers he faced daily. Sergeant Bizup understood the importance of giving his son normal childhood experiences. As a police officer, he saw too many children who hadn't been given proper opportunities to build confidence and independence. Bobby was bright, curious, and physically capable, exactly the kind of boy who would thrive in the mountain wilderness of Colorado. When the family heard about Camp St. Malo, a Catholic boys' camp nestled in the shadow of Mount Meeker near Allens Park, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Camp St. Malo was no ordinary summer camp. Located at 9,200 feet above sea level, in what is now Rocky Mountain National Park, the camp offered boys ages 8 to 16 an experience in high-altitude wilderness living that few programs could match. The stone chapel and rustic cabins had been built by hand, creating a setting that was both spiritually enriching and physically challenging. For Catholic families like the Bizups, the camp represented an ideal combination of faith, adventure, and character development. The decision to send Bobby to camp wasn't made lightly. Mrs. Bizup had natural concerns about sending her deaf son so far from home to an environment where communication challenges could become safety issues. But Bobby was eager to go, and his parents had worked hard to ensure he could handle any situation that might arise. He was an excellent lip reader, could communicate basic needs through gestures, and had the street smarts that came from growing up as the son of a police officer in a major city. In the weeks leading up to camp, Bobby's excitement was obvious to everyone who knew him. He packed and repacked his suitcase, studied maps of the Rocky Mountains, and peppered his father with questions about camping, hiking, and mountain wildlife. For a boy who had spent most of his life in urban Denver, the prospect of spending weeks in the pristine wilderness of the Colorado Rockies was the adventure of a lifetime. The camp session began smoothly. Bobby quickly adapted to the routine of mountain life: morning prayers, outdoor activities, campfire meals, and sleeping under stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. His counselors reported that despite his hearing loss, Bobby was integrating well with the other boys. His physical courage and natural athleticism made him popular during hiking excursions and outdoor games. More importantly, his gentle personality and genuine smile had won over both staff and campers. Bobby's letters home during those first weeks radiated happiness. In one letter that would later be discovered among his belongings, he wrote to his parents about the incredible mountain views, the challenging hikes, and the friends he was making. He described feeling proud of himself for keeping up with the other boys during difficult climbs, and expressed gratitude for the opportunity to experience something so different from his life in Denver. For his parents, reading these letters confirmed that they had made the right decision in sending him to camp. The camp's location was both its greatest asset and its most significant risk. Surrounded by some of Colorado's most spectacular mountain terrain, Camp St. Malo offered unparalleled opportunities for outdoor adventure. Mount Meeker, towering at 13,911 feet, provided a dramatic backdrop for daily activities. But the same wilderness that made the camp special could also be unforgiving to anyone who wandered off alone or became lost in the vast network of peaks, valleys, and dense forests that surrounded the facility. On Friday evening, August 15, 1958, Bobby was seen by his counselors during the evening activities. He appeared happy and healthy, participating normally in the camp's dinner and evening programs. As always, he wore his hearing aid, a bulky but essential device that helped him catch some sounds and vibrations from his environment. That night, he went to bed in his cabin like any other evening, surrounded by his new friends and looking forward to another day of mountain adventures. But something went wrong during those quiet overnight hours. When Saturday morning arrived, Bobby Bizup was nowhere to be found. His bed appeared to have been slept in, but sometime during the night or early morning he'd vanished from Camp St. Malo without a trace. His hearing aid was found in the cabin, a discovery that would prove crucial to understanding what happened next. Without his hearing aid, Bobby was completely isolated from the auditory world, unable to hear voices calling his name, unable to detect approaching danger, unable to respond to the search efforts that would soon mobilize across the mountains. The initial response was swift but constrained by the limitations of 1958 technology and the remote location. Camp counselors searched the immediate area, hoping Bobby had simply wandered off for an early morning walk and would return on his own. When those efforts failed, local authorities were notified, and within hours one of Colorado's most extensive search operations was underway. The search for Bobby Bizup became a community-wide effort that captured national attention. Over 250 searchers combed the rugged terrain around Mount Meeker, including local volunteers, National Guard units, Civil Air Patrol pilots, and even an experienced Native American tracker. The Civil Air Patrol logged countless hours flying search patterns over the vast wilderness area, while ground teams explored every trail, creek bed, and rocky outcropping within miles of the camp. For Sergeant and Mrs. Bizup, the search represented a parent's worst nightmare played out on a public stage. They rushed to Colorado and established themselves at the search headquarters, coordinating with authorities while maintaining hope that their son would be found alive. The fact that Bobby was deaf added an extra layer of urgency. Even if searchers came close to him, he might not hear their calls or their helicopters overhead. As days turned into weeks, the massive search effort gradually wound down. Despite the most extensive manhunt in Colorado history up to that point, no trace of Bobby had been found. Theories ranged from him falling into a concealed crevasse to being attacked by wildlife, but without evidence, his disappearance remained a complete mystery. The official search was suspended after nearly a month, leaving his parents and the camp community devastated and searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. The discovery of Bobby's remains nearly a year later, on July 27, 1959, by a group of hikers on Mount Meeker, brought closure but also raised new questions. His body was found at an elevation of approximately 12,000 feet, miles from the camp and in terrain that would have been extremely challenging for an experienced adult mountaineer, let alone a 10-year-old boy. Along with his remains, searchers found his hearing aid, confirming his identity and providing a heartbreaking reminder of the communication barriers he faced during his final hours. The location where Bobby was discovered suggested that he had somehow travelled substantial distance from Camp St. Malo, navigating difficult mountain terrain in what must have been a desperate attempt to find help or return to safety. The discovery raised troubling questions about how a 10-year-old boy, especially one with hearing loss, could have travelled so far into such dangerous territory without being detected by the massive search effort that had been conducted months earlier. For the Bizup family, Bobby's death represented not just the loss of a beloved son, but the shattering of their faith in the safety of childhood adventures. Sergeant Bizup, who had spent his career protecting others, found himself unable to protect his own child. Mrs. Bizup struggled with guilt over the decision to send Bobby to camp, questioning whether his hearing loss should have kept him closer to home, where communication wouldn't have been such a critical safety issue. The impact on Camp St. Malo was equally devastating. The camp had prided itself on providing safe wilderness experiences for boys, but Bobby's disappearance forced a complete reassessment of their safety protocols and supervision procedures. The tragedy led to enhanced safety measures, improved communication procedures, and more rigorous accountability systems designed to ensure that no child could disappear without immediate detection. The case also highlighted the unique vulnerabilities faced by children with disabilities in wilderness settings. Bobby's hearing loss, which had never prevented him from living a full and active life in Denver, became a critical factor in his disappearance and the search efforts that followed. His story became a catalyst for improved safety protocols for children with disabilities in outdoor programs across the country. Decades later, questions remain about exactly what happened to Bobby Bizup during those final hours. Recent investigations have raised disturbing possibilities about adult misconduct at the camp, adding another layer of tragedy to an already heartbreaking story. But regardless of the specific circumstances that led to his disappearance, Bobby's legacy lies in the countless safety improvements that were implemented in his memory. The boy who left Denver with such excitement for his mountain adventure became a symbol of both the joys and risks of childhood independence. His parents' decision to give him normal experiences despite his disability reflected the best of 1950s optimism about children's capabilities. The tragedy that followed served as a stark reminder that even the most well-intentioned adventures can have devastating consequences when safety systems fail. The Provo Canyon Disappearance, 1999. The Spanish Fork High School cafeteria buzzed with typical teenage chatter on that Tuesday afternoon in May 1995. Students grabbed their lunches, caught up on gossip, and made plans for after school. But by the time the final bell rang, one of those students would never make it home. 15-year-old Kiplyn Davis had vanished without a trace, launching one of Utah's most complex missing person investigations. The discovery that Kiplyn was missing came gradually, like a slow-burning fuse. Her mother, Tamara, expected her red-headed daughter home at the usual time after school. But as the afternoon stretched into evening, concern turned to panic. Kiplyn's belongings told the first part of the story. Her purse, makeup, dental retainer, and school books all remained untouched in her locker at Spanish Fork High School. This wasn't the behavior of a teenage runaway. The initial evidence painted a puzzling timeline. Kiplyn had started her day with an argument with her parents about school, arriving early to campus in what witnesses described as an agitated state. She attended all her morning classes normally, ate lunch with friends in the cafeteria, and was seen by multiple classmates throughout the day. But somewhere between lunch and her fourth period class, Kiplyn Davis simply disappeared. One friend claimed he spoke with Kiplyn between fourth and fifth period, placing her on campus later than other witnesses. But when pressed by investigators, this same friend changed his story completely. The inconsistency raised the first red flag in what would become a web of conflicting testimonies and suspicious behavior from Kiplyn's classmates. Within 2 months, the FBI joined the investigation, treating the case as a possible kidnapping. Federal agents interviewed dozens of students, teachers, and community members. They discovered that Kiplyn had mentioned to friends that she wouldn't be attending planned activities that evening, and had even suggested it might be better if she ran away. But her family knew better. Despite the morning argument, running away wasn't in Kiplyn's character. The investigation's focus soon shifted to a group of Kiplyn's male classmates who displayed suspicious behavior from the beginning. Timmy Brent Olson emerged as the primary person of interest, largely due to his constantly changing stories about when he last saw Kiplyn and where he was on May 2, 1995. During multiple interviews with law enforcement, Olson provided dramatically different accounts of his whereabouts and relationship with the missing girl. But it was the witness testimonies that truly built the case against Olson. Multiple women came forward with disturbing accounts of Olson's behavior. At least 4 testified that he had been sexually aggressive toward them or had committed sexual assault. More damning were the friends who claimed Olson had confessed to them about Kiplyn's fate. These witnesses painted a horrific picture. According to their testimonies, Olson had admitted to sexually assaulting and killing Kiplyn Davis, then hiding her body in a canyon near the Spanish Fork River. Some said he told them we buried her in the sand, while others recalled him describing the specific location where they disposed of the body. The details varied, but the core confession remained consistent across multiple witnesses. The investigation expanded to include other classmates who investigators believed had knowledge of Kiplyn's disappearance. Christopher Neil Jepson, Rucker Lifeson, Gary Blackmore, and Scott Brunson all came under scrutiny. The case became a complex puzzle of teenage secrets, false alibis, and conflicting loyalties. Expert analysis of the evidence revealed patterns consistent with foul play rather than a voluntary disappearance. Criminal profilers noted that Kiplyn's personal belongings remaining in her locker indicated she intended to return. The timing of her disappearance, between classes during school hours, suggested someone with intimate knowledge of her schedule and access to the school grounds. Despite extensive searches of the canyons around Spanish Fork, including areas near the Spanish Fork River where witnesses claimed Olson said he buried the body, Kiplyn's remains were never found. Search teams combed through train tunnels, canyon areas, and various locations mentioned in the conflicting witness statements. The rugged terrain and multiple possible burial sites made the searches extremely challenging. The case took years to build, with investigators carefully piecing together witness testimonies and evidence. In 2003, US Attorney Paul Warner revived the probe, focusing intensively on the group of classmates who had been persons of interest since the beginning. Grand jury proceedings led to multiple indictments for perjury and making false statements to authorities. The investigation revealed a pattern of lies and cover-ups that had persisted for years. Rucker Leifson pleaded guilty to lying to a grand jury and received a 4-year prison sentence. Gary Blackmore and Scott Brunson were also found guilty of perjury charges. Christopher Neil Jepson ultimately pleaded no contest to obstruction charges, but signed an affidavit stating he didn't know the circumstances of Kiplyn's disappearance. In 2009, prosecutors dropped murder charges against Jepson rather than seek the death penalty, indicating the challenges they faced in proving their case beyond reasonable doubt. The investigation had uncovered a web of teenage lies and conflicting stories that made it difficult to determine exactly what happened to Kiplyn Davis. The breakthrough came in 2011 when Timmy Brent Olson finally pleaded guilty to manslaughter. His version of events provided some answers while raising new questions. Olson claimed he witnessed another individual hit Kiplyn in the head with a rock and subsequently helped move her body, but he refused to name this alleged accomplice or reveal where they buried her remains. Expert investigators found Olson's partial confession both credible and frustrating. While it confirmed their suspicions about foul play, it left crucial questions unanswered. Who was the unnamed accomplice? Where exactly did they hide Kiplyn's body? Why did Olson participate in moving the body if he wasn't the primary perpetrator? The most plausible explanation, based on the evidence and expert analysis, suggests that Kiplyn Davis was indeed murdered by one or more of her classmates on May 2, 1995. The weight of witness testimonies, Olson's eventual confession, and the physical evidence all point to a tragic case of teenage violence that was covered up for years. Olson was sentenced to 15 years in prison but remained eligible for parole in 2021. However, the parole board denied his release after he continued to refuse cooperation in disclosing the location of Kiplyn's remains. His silence has kept the Davis family from having closure and has prevented authorities from fully understanding what happened in those final moments of Kiplyn's life. Olympic Peninsula's Secret, 2006. Some men are built for quiet lives behind desks, content with routine and predictability. Gilbert Mark Gilman was not one of those men. Born on November 26, 1958, Gil grew up understanding that the world was a complex place where intelligence, strength, and adaptability could mean the difference between life and death. From an early age, he seemed drawn to challenges that would have intimidated most people. His friends called him Gil or Gig, and those who knew him best understood that beneath his calm exterior lived someone who thrived in situations others found overwhelming. Standing just 5'7" inches and weighing around 160 pounds, Gil might not have looked imposing, but his presence commanded respect. His greying brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of a thoughtful academic, which wasn't entirely wrong, but it was only part of the story. Gil's path to becoming one of America's most educated and experienced intelligence operatives began with his decision to join the US Army. He didn't choose an easy route. Gil became a paratrooper with the elite 82nd Airborne Division, one of the military's most demanding units. The 82nd Airborne was known for deploying anywhere in the world within 18 hours, and Gil embraced this lifestyle of constant readiness and physical challenge. His military service took him to places most Americans only read about in newspapers. He served in Panama during a period of political tension, deployed to East Africa where he witnessed conflicts that shaped his understanding of global politics, and spent time in Israel, where he developed skills that would serve him throughout his career. The young paratrooper distinguished himself enough to earn 2 Bronze Star medals, decorations that spoke to his courage and effectiveness in combat situations. But Gil's interests extended far beyond military tactics and physical prowess. While many soldiers focus solely on their immediate duties, Gil was already thinking about the bigger picture. He understood that in an increasingly complex world, success required more than just physical courage. It demanded intellectual sophistication and cultural understanding. This realization led him to pursue education that would have impressed professors at any university. After his military service, Gil enrolled at some of the world's most prestigious institutions. He earned degrees from Union College in New York, known for its rigorous liberal arts program. Not satisfied with just one degree, he continued his education at the London School of Economics, one of the world's leading centres for understanding international relations and economic policy. His academic journey culminated with studies at the Solvay Business School in Brussels, where he gained insights into European business practices and international finance. This combination of military experience and elite education made Gil uniquely valuable to organisations dealing with complex international issues. His language skills were particularly impressive. He spoke fluent Arabic, Russian and Chinese, in addition to his native English. In a world where communication could mean the difference between peace and conflict, Gil's linguistic abilities opened doors that remained closed to most intelligence professionals. His work as a military interrogator in Iraq placed him at the centre of America's post-9/11 intelligence operations. This wasn't desk work. Gil was dealing directly with prisoners who might hold information crucial to American lives. The skills required for effective interrogation went far beyond speaking the language. It demanded psychological insight, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to read people under extreme stress. Gil excelled at this challenging work, earning assignments in counter-terrorism and counterintelligence that required the highest security clearances. Between his military contracts, Gil worked as a civilian contractor in Iraq, evidence of how valuable his skills had become to American operations in the region. This work was dangerous and demanding, but it also connected him to networks of intelligence professionals who would remain part of his life for years to come. When Gil decided to step back from direct intelligence work, he didn't choose complete retirement. Instead, he joined the United Nations in New York, where his international experience and language skills made him a valuable asset in addressing global conflicts and humanitarian crises. The UN work satisfied his desire to continue serving his country while engaging with the broader international community. In 2004, a new opportunity brought Gil to Washington State. Sandy Matheson, who directed the state's Department of Retirement Systems, was running for Congress and needed someone with Gil's unique background to manage her campaign. The job combined his political insights with his understanding of complex systems, exactly the kind of challenge that attracted him. When Matheson's congressional campaign ended, she offered Gil a position as Deputy Director of the Washington State Retirement Systems Department. For someone accustomed to international intrigue and high-stakes operations, managing pension funds might have seemed mundane. But Gil understood that financial security for public employees was another form of public service, and he approached the work with characteristic thoroughness. His colleagues in Olympia found Gil to be intelligent, reliable, and surprisingly normal for someone with his exotic background. He lived quietly, maintained his physical fitness, and seemed to enjoy the Pacific Northwest's outdoor opportunities. Those who worked with him knew about his military and intelligence background, but Gil didn't dwell on his past adventures. He seemed content with his new life in Washington State. That contentment made his decision on June 24, 2006, all the more puzzling. On that Saturday morning, Gil decided to visit Olympic National Park for what he described as a short photo walk. He wasn't planning a serious hike. He dressed in a bright blue and green Hawaiian shirt, khaki pants or shorts, and casual sandals. He brought his camera but no backpack, no survival gear, and no indication that he expected to be gone for more than a few hours. The drive to the Staircase Ranger Station took Gil through some of Washington's most beautiful forest country. The Olympic Peninsula's temperate rainforest was a dramatic change from the deserts of Iraq or the urban landscapes of his UN work. Ancient Douglas firs and western red cedars created a cathedral-like atmosphere that many visitors found almost spiritual. For someone with Gil's appreciation for natural beauty and solitude, the park represented a perfect escape from the complexities of his professional life. When Gil arrived at the staircase area, he was entering one of the park's most accessible yet pristine locations. The Staircase Rapids Loop Trail was designed for casual visitors, a 2.1-mile loop that showcased the area's natural beauty without requiring serious hiking experience. The trail followed the North Fork Skokomish River through groves of centuries-old trees, past moss-covered logs and fern-filled clearings that seemed unchanged since before European settlement. Park ranger Sanny Lustig noticed Gil's arrival because music was playing loudly from his silver 2005 Ford Thunderbird convertible. Their brief conversation was friendly and routine. Lustig asked Gil to turn down the music and got the impression he was planning a short hike. Nothing about Gil's appearance or behaviour suggested anything unusual. He seemed like any other weekend visitor looking forward to a peaceful walk in the woods. The trail Gil chose wound through some of the most beautiful old-growth forest in the Pacific Northwest. 300-year-old trees towered overhead, creating a canopy so thick that the forest floor remained in perpetual twilight. The sound of rushing water from the Skokomish River provided a constant backdrop, while the air carried the fresh scent of moss and decaying cedar. It was exactly the kind of environment where someone might lose track of time, absorbed in photography and the simple pleasure of being alone in nature. For Gil's mother, Doris, her son's disappearance represented a complete break from everything she thought she knew about his character. Gil wasn't impulsive or careless. His military training and intelligence experience had taught him to assess risks and prepare for contingencies. Even his casual clothes and minimal equipment made sense for the short photo walk he had planned. But when he failed to meet Sandy Matheson for their planned trip to Spokane the next day, Doris knew something had gone terribly wrong. The search that followed revealed just how completely Gil had vanished. Despite his distinctive bright shirt and the well-marked trail system, searchers found no trace of him. Helicopters with heat-seeking equipment, tracking dogs, and dozens of experienced search and rescue volunteers combed the area for 10 days without discovering a single clue. For someone of Gil's experience and training to disappear so completely seemed almost impossible. The Scoutmaster's Search, 2005. When Onabun opened her computer to check Pac 6's website statistics in 2012, she saw the numbers that mattered most to her. Thousands of hikers had purchased the emergency survival kits her company designed and assembled. Each sale represented someone better prepared for wilderness emergencies, someone who might avoid the fate that befell her brother Michael 7 years earlier. The impact of one man's disappearance had grown far beyond his family's private grief, touching outdoor enthusiasts across the country and changing how people prepared for wilderness adventures. Michael Fisser's vanishing in Yosemite National Park created ripples that spread through multiple communities, from the Boy Scout troops where he served as a dedicated leader to the hiking community that embraced new safety protocols because of his story. His disappearance sparked the most expensive search and rescue operation in Yosemite's history, costing nearly $500,000 and involving personnel from 5 counties, aircraft, tracking dogs, and even Marine units. But more significantly, it prompted lasting changes in how people approached wilderness safety and preparation. The outdoor community's response to Michael's case reflected a broader awakening about the importance of proper preparation, even for experienced hikers. Gear manufacturers began emphasizing emergency equipment more heavily in their marketing. Hiking clubs started requiring basic survival items for group trips. Online forums buzzed with discussions about the 10 essentials, the fundamental items every hiker should carry regardless of trip length or difficulty. Most personally meaningful was the transformation within his own family. Onabun channeled her grief into action, founding Pac 6 to provide pre-assembled survival kits containing the basic items that might have made a difference for Michael: compass, knife, headlamp, fire starter, signal mirror, and whistle. The company's name honored Michael's memory while providing practical tools for other adventurers. The story began on June 15, 2005, when Michael Allen Fisser, a 51-year-old postal worker from Stockton, California, arrived at Yosemite National Park for what he planned as a challenging but routine solo backpacking trip. Michael wasn't a casual hiker. He'd spent over 30 years exploring wilderness areas throughout California, and beyond. His experience included previous visits to the Hetch Hetchy area where he planned to hike, making his disappearance all the more puzzling to those who knew him. Michael grew up in Southern California with a deep appreciation for the outdoors that shaped his entire adult life. Adopted as a child along with one of his sisters, he found in nature a sense of belonging and peace that complemented his quiet, introspective personality. Friends described him as intelligent and kind, someone who preferred solitude in the wilderness to crowded social gatherings. His photographic memory served him well on hiking trails, allowing him to navigate complex route systems and remember detailed topographical features. His dedication to physical fitness was evident in his daily routine. Michael cycled to work at the post office every day and maintained a regular hiking schedule that kept him in excellent shape for backcountry adventures. He was known among his hiking companions for sometimes overestimating what he could accomplish in a single day, a trait that spoke to his confidence in his abilities, but also suggested a willingness to push boundaries that concerned his family. Michael's involvement with the Boy Scouts of America added another dimension to his character. As a scoutmaster, he shared his love of the outdoors with young people, teaching them navigation skills, camping techniques, and respect for wilderness environments. His scout troops benefited from his extensive knowledge and patient teaching style. The irony that someone so dedicated to teaching outdoor safety would himself disappear without a trace wasn't lost on those who worked with him. On that June morning in 2005, Michael set out from the Hetch Hetchy Reservoir area with an ambitious plan. He intended to hike to Rancheria Falls, continue to Till Mountain, visit Lake Vernon, and loop back through Beehive before returning to the trailhead. The route would cover significant distance through varied terrain, from the reservoir's relatively gentle shoreline to challenging mountain approaches above the tree line. The Hetch Hetchy area where Michael planned to hike held special significance as one of America's great conservation battlegrounds. Originally a pristine valley similar to Yosemite Valley, it had been dammed in the early 1900s to provide water for San Francisco, creating the reservoir that now dominated the landscape. The area attracted fewer visitors than Yosemite's more famous destinations, offering the solitude that experienced hikers like Michael appreciated. Weather conditions added complexity to Michael's planned route. A late-season snowstorm moved through the area the day after his hike began, creating dangerous conditions that would have challenged even experienced mountaineers. The combination of fresh snow, reduced visibility, and potentially icy conditions transformed what should have been a demanding but manageable hike into a survival situation. When Michael failed to return by his expected date of June 19th, his family initially hoped he'd simply extended his trip or been delayed by weather. But as days passed without contact, their concern deepened. His sisters, Honor and Robin, knew their brother well enough to understand that he wouldn't simply disappear without notification. Despite his independent nature, Michael was responsible about checking in with family and maintaining his work schedule. The search operation that began on June 21st represented one of the most intensive efforts in Yosemite's history. Park Service personnel coordinated with county search and rescue teams, federal agencies, and volunteer organizations to cover the vast area where Michael might have traveled. Helicopters equipped with heat-sensing equipment flew grid patterns over the rugged terrain. Tracking dogs attempted to follow any scent trails. Ground teams searched hiking routes, camping areas, and off-trail regions where Michael might have become lost or injured. The discovery of Michael's backpack near Till Mountain provided the search's only significant clue. The pack contained his topographical map and camera bag, but was missing his camera and the gallon milk jug he used as water container. The backpack's location, just off the main trail at the snowline, suggested Michael had been in the area where the storm would have hit hardest. But the absence of the camera and water container raised questions about whether he had continued hiking after leaving the pack, or had met with some other fate. For Michael's family, the partial recovery of his belongings created both hope and anguish. The backpack proved he had reached the planned area of his hike, but its abandonment was completely out of character. Friends and family emphasized that Michael would never voluntarily leave his pack behind. It contained essential navigation and safety equipment that an experienced hiker would never abandon willingly. The massive search effort's failure to locate any trace of Michael beyond his backpack highlighted the challenges facing wilderness search and rescue operations. Despite spending $452,000 and deploying resources from multiple agencies, the search teams could not solve the mystery of what happened to an experienced hiker in an area he knew well. The case became a stark reminder of how quickly conditions can change in mountain environments and how even prepared hikers can vanish without a trace. Michael's disappearance prompted immediate changes in how his family and the broader hiking community approached wilderness safety. Honorboon's research into survival equipment revealed that Michael, despite his experience, had not carried some basic emergency items that might have made a difference in a survival situation. He apparently lacked a signal mirror or whistle that could have aided rescue efforts. His deviation from his planned route, while not unusual for experienced hikers, made the search more difficult and highlighted the importance of detailed trip planning and communication. The founding of Pack 6 represented Honor's determination to honor her brother's memory through practical action. The company's pre-assembled survival kits addressed a gap she had identified in the outdoor equipment market. Many hikers, even experienced ones like Michael, failed to carry basic emergency items because they didn't think systematically about survival needs or found it inconvenient to assemble the necessary components individually. Pack 6's emphasis on the 10 essentials reflected lessons learned from Michael's case and similar disappearances. The company's educational materials stressed that proper preparation wasn't just about having the right equipment, but about developing the mindset to carry emergency items even on routine day hikes or familiar routes. Honor's personal story added credibility to the company's message and helped convince other hikers to take preparation seriously. The ripple effects of Michael's case extended beyond his family's business venture. Hiking clubs and outdoor organizations began emphasizing emergency preparedness more strongly in their safety education programs. Online hiking forums regularly referenced Michael's story when discussing the importance of carrying survival equipment and maintaining communication with family or friends about hiking plans. The case also influenced search and rescue protocols in national parks. The extensive resources devoted to finding Michael demonstrated both the commitment to locating missing hikers and the practical limitations facing search teams in vast wilderness areas. Park services began emphasizing prevention through education, rather than relying solely on rescue capabilities after people went missing. 19 cases, 19 people who walked into the wilderness and never came home. Some were found years later, others remain missing today. A few cases were solved, but most still have no clear answers. But these stories also show us something else. Families who never give up searching, communities that come together when someone goes missing, search teams who risk their own lives trying to bring people home, changes made to prevent future tragedies. The wilderness will always be dangerous. That's part of what makes it wild. But understanding these cases, what went wrong and what went right, might help the next person who heads into the forest.